just going to go ahead and assume there probably is milk in this.
I mean, you'll know once you open it.
That's true. This being a tall Dunkin' original iced coffee malt beverage.
Why do you shake it?
It says shake it on the side. Say what you will about Dunkin' Donuts, because I have a lot to say about them, but they have like a floor for how good their coffee is, and when you need it first thing in the morning, that is a blessing.
There's also a ceiling.
There's also a ceiling, but knowing where that floor is when you've just come off of an all-nighter, right? Or you're in the middle of like doing an overnight trying to reset the store, and you want to like, dang, I need to be certain that this coffee is at least a baseline level of acceptable. You don't want the stuff that's been sitting for 8 hours at the local dep. You want acceptable coffee. Oh yeah, that's milky. Gonna have some milk pills. Hi!
This is our talk back episode about coffee beverages, prepackaged coffee beverages.
Mm-hmm.
I need to have a sip of this to see how bad it is.
Oh, that's rancid.
I was going to say,
it's
this
not
sounds
rancid,
bad.
But it's bad. And like all times, I've got my drink ready to go.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I don't know that I'm going to finish that, but we'll see.
That flavor combination is a serious misstep.
Yeah, because it's like, they're just working in odds against each other.
Anyway, let's talk about Higurashi.
Chapter 4. Eskay, update your PNG tuber model with a tiny little thing of Dunkin' spiked iced coffee.
Yes, we're doing this.
Just a little. No, don't. You don't have to update the model. Just Photoshop it in right there.
We're updating the model. We're making it take sips for the breathing animation.
No, I don't have the energy for this. Or the artistic talent. Anyway, speaking of getting fucked up on shit, let's talk about some teenagers in 1980s Japan.
Yeah, experiencing awful trauma. Well, this one, there was less awful trauma this time around, or at least it happened off screen.
Yeah,
so that means it basically didn't happen.
Exactly.
Right?
If it doesn't happen on screen, then we don't know if it happens. All right. So this time for the talkback, instead of starting with the questions or the recap like we usually do, we're going to start with something different.
Yeah.
And we're going to start by explaining the one thing I've been spoiled on. So some of you know that I've been doing my damnedest to talk and theorize around it, and hopefully that's shown through. But going into this, I was spoiled on one particular aspect of this series.
What could that be?
And Chapter 4 is finally the first time where you have enough to put it together. So because there's no longer any way for me to talk around this, instead of just blurting out what it is, I want to walk you through how one would get there.
Okay.
And that particular thing is, what the heck is up with Rika?
What indeed? What indeed?
What indeed is up with Rika? So we've had senses of this in previous chapters that Rika, for some reason, knows more than she lets on, right? She's had like where we see her taking action to like if just looking at it, going to stab one of the Sonozaki sisters with a needle. Right, or where
bringing Shmion her insulin.
Yeah, getting Shmion her insulin. Or other times where it seems like she has a strange amount of canniness for someone her age.
If someone's canny, does that mean they have can? Canniness, but canny, E is already an adjectival suffix.
Moving briskly along. Actually, I think you're right. I think it would be best described as her as being canny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Moving along.
Having.
We've also seen that she is remarkably mature for her age. Where she's like taking care of both Sadako and herself and has a lot of homemaking skills that would be strange for someone as young as not completely unheard of, but strange for someone as young as she is. And she's had that level of responsibility for a very long time. We're led to believe that's because she's been living on her own for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or living with Sadako without any parents. And at first blush, that kind of makes sense, right? Because you have to grow up quickly in that scenario. But there's always a weird thing in the background where she's still technically a adopted child of, what was it, Kimiyoshi?
Yeah.
Mayor Kimiyoshi. And Mayor Kimiyoshi seems completely fine with this. Which is strange because it's like, why would he be okay with two very young teenage girls living with one another and not under his roof? And I can imagine, and really the only way that might be the case is if, like, Rika has just demonstrated an unfathomable amount of maturity and put-togetherness for her age. Right? Where he's looking at, like, yeah, I want to argue, but demonstrably, y'all are doing really well, so I guess unless there's an emergency, there's nothing for me to do here. And then we get to chapter 4. And suddenly all that strange canniness, that knowledge of things that she really shouldn't have, or that strange amount of maturity is cast in an incredibly different light. Where her canniness, her knowledge of what's going on, is portrayed at first blush as her sitting in on a lot of the meetings of the Sonozakis and the three families, right? It's portrayed in that moment as, oh, Rika knows things because she sits in on those meetings. Because she has access to the whole knowledge of the three families and all that. And whatever they discuss, she's going to pick up on, even if she's looking like she's doing something else. And her an uncanny amount of not maturity, but like her physical knowledge, her homemaking skills, all of this stuff that she seems to know how to do, that's portrayed as people in the village taking her aside and showing her how to do things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her mom writes that she never taught her how to do any of this. She just knows, and it must be all of these misguided villagers taking her child away from her and parenting her, and parenting her child when she's not around. That's how the game kind of portrays this stuff at first blush. However, it doesn't take a whole lot of reasoning to get through that and be like, wait, something isn't quite right with that explanation, right? If Rika's canny came from simply, observing meetings of the three families, why would anything that came to light at those meetings lead to her being able to murk one of the Sonozaki sisters? Why would they let that out in that context? Why would she be getting in fights with Shmion behind the school building? It doesn't seem right that's the same that's the same kind of knowledge. There's also the fact that, like, the other villagers don't, as far as we see, do any kind of parenting to Rika. They just treat her as this strange religious icon, say, yay, Rika, and then move on their way. They want no interaction with her beyond just, idle praise and then moving on. They don't seem to have any interest in parenting Rika.
I don't know. I feel like we see people dote on her, like the dude giving the tour here. He's not just
they dote
sitting there praising her. He's including her. He's taking her out
on her, but that's different from wanting to do the work of showing her how to sew.
Okay.
That they're like, and letting her get away with stealing things, right? that doesn't speak to a type of parenting that makes you want to learn how to do these things. And we know from her mom's writing, she never taught her how to do that stuff. She just knows at a very young age. There's also the issue of Rika's foresight, where Rika seems to know about things before she should be able to, or seems to have some limited, faulty knowledge of the future.
Hmm.
All right. And this is coming down to like, oh, maybe, why is she like this? Is she listening to the radio and knows about world events before they should happen? Or, before other people would know that they had happened? Is she just really good at telling the weather? Hey, that's it. I think the important thing to take away here is that Rika has an ability to be at a place and time before it should be known that she needs to be there. But that knowledge isn't perfect. Sometimes it rains when she doesn't expect it to.
Yep.
Right? It's not delivered perfect knowledge of the future. It is imperfect. There is a level of personal judgment involved in that. She has to make that call.
Mm-hmm.
We're not given the impression that this is delivered to her. Because if it was delivered, why would it be wrong? If a god takes the time to deliver you visions of the future, why would those visions occasionally turn out wrong? Right? On the face of it, that doesn't make sense.
I think it's fine.
If the god of weather tells you it's going to rain tomorrow and it doesn't, what?
I didn't tell that to Poseidon. There's been plenty
I took another sip and I regret it.
Yeah. That the mixological combination that went into the creation of this beverage was, I think,
I feel like
short-sighted, misguided.
There's a way to do like an enjoyable spiked iced coffee, and this ain't it. Malt beverage is not the way to go.
Yep.
Moving briskly along.
That wiped my train of thought. What were you just saying?
If the god of weather tells you it's going to rain tomorrow and it doesn't.
Oh yeah. That doesn't seem that odd to me.
But it would make it seem that the being delivering these to you is not infallible.
Yeah. That doesn't seem that odd to me. It seems that seems like a pretty specific to our era and culture and religion we're familiar with thing. The idea that a god is infallible and unchangeable and all-knowing, and that whatever they say will exactly be
that's fair
to the letter as it is.
I accept this pushback.
Yeah, I feel like from another perspective, like a Greek pagan perspective, or a Hindu perspective, or a Shinto perspective, the idea might fit a bit better. I don't know too much about these traditions, but I know that a god or divine revelation is probably not going to be quite the same as how we are led to think of it.
You know what? I hear that and I accept it. You were right to push back on that. Thank you.
I have to do my best to argue against the thing that you already know is true. This is the best I can do, all right?
And of course, we also have Rika's knowledge of the future of the Watanagashi killings.
Yeah.
And that knowledge is strangely delivered, right? She's like, oh, I know that this will happen on these years, but on the last one, sometimes I might be, it might happen a few days later, or sometimes it might happen on the day of. That's a strange way to phrase knowledge of the future. Like, how can the future have multiple different versions of it? How can you speak of these like it is a sample size greater than one? And I think that's the last big clue we really need to dial in what is with Rika.
What is it?
Hold on, one other thing.
Okay.
One other thing. Through all these series of events, things have been different. That seems like a dumb thing to point out, but it's really not, because as we've seen, like, sometimes the weather is nice, sometimes the weather's bad. On the whole, that isn't going to change much. But events have gone wildly differently between iterations of this story. And there has to be a reason that people aren't just doing the same events over and over, right? There, like, what is the difference between each of these iterations? What is the catalyst that is affecting some kind of change? If it was just people plopped in the same scenario with the baseline level of like weather randomness, you'd expect they'd wind up in roughly the same place. Maybe barring a strange act of God, but like on a larger sample size, you'd expect that probably things turn out roughly the same. But they don't. Different people's wildly diverging ambitions come to light in each of these chapters. The Great Hinamizawa Disaster only seems to happen in some of these variants. And that implies that there is a reason that these are all different from one another. So taking all that together, this is your last stop. This is your last chance to figure it out for yourself. How do we reconcile the fact that events are different between timelines? Rika has knowledge of the future, but knowledge that seems based on a sample size rather than delivered information. How do we reconcile the fact that she is incredibly mature for her age and has knowledge that no one has given her, that no one else seems to have given her about how to live this life? And how do we reconcile the fact that Rika seems to know a lot more about what her friends are doing than they ever directly explain to her? And the answer, drum roll please.
I don't have any drums.
Drum roll please.
Ba-dum-tsh.
Rika's time looping. And that is an incredible thing to pull out of nowhere if you haven't had any background with that kind of narrative before. The reason this was spoiled to me is because I am a huge fan of time loop fiction.
No, really?
Yeah, for fucking real. And someone in the Discord idly posted a meme of some time loop properties. Some are like stuff that's baked into the premise, like Steins Gate or ReZero, right? And so like they made a meme of like, oh look, there's this character that's a composite character wearing Subaru Natsuki's tracksuit and doing Hoenn Kyoma's pose, and part of that was they had Rika Furude's face. And I'm like, God damn it. I get it, but God damn it. Now, it's also important to note that in the time Higurashi came out, right, it's not like there weren't other bases for like that kind of narrative in a visual novel. Notably, one of the major visual novels I can only assume Higurashi had been influenced by would have been which I believe was in the mid-90s, which was a very ambitious kind of time loop adventure game / visual novel that required the protagonist to go through various iterations of events, tracking down different leads in order to put together what was happening and eventually get to the right place at the right time. It's also a porn game, so like you don't have to play it, but it's incredible the effect that had on other games going forward.
There's another thing that had a big effect that I bet you could piece together from Japanese pop culture, but not a VN.
From Japanese pop culture, but not a VN.
Yeah.
Hit me. I
Girl
don't know.
Who Leapt Through Time.
Oh yeah, Girl Who Leapt Through Time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a copy of that on my shelf.
Yeah.
That's
Good
yeah.
book.
Yeah. When was that printed originally? Was that the 80s?
Girl Who Leapt Through Time was serialized from 1965 through 1966.
There you go. Wow, the 60s. Yeah. So even then, like there is a basis in Japanese culture for these serial time looping narratives, right? nowadays that's kind of been supplanted by by the propensity of some other works in that genre. I'd say Steins Gate is arguably the go-to reference point for a lot of people now, but even to the point where, like, if you've seen The Girl Who Leapt Through Time anime, the animated film, that film itself references tropes and visual iconography that were established with Steins Gate's anime. So, like, it's kind of gotten all the way back around. But yeah, there are ways you could. It was absolutely reasonable that you could pull this out without the absolute brain rot amount of time loop stories we now have. God, I did another one. It's bad. It's there and it's open, so I keep going for it. Like, oh, I'm sure it's not as bad as I remember. No, it's awful.
There is the option to not sip it.
No, there isn't.
I am taking this option, and it's serving me quite well, really.
So there you go. That's the big to do. That is the one thing I was spoiled on going into this story. And that now the game has presented with more than enough information to reason it out. Surprisingly, however, that didn't serve to answer a lot of the questions.
Yeah, that's pretty funny, isn't it?
That's the funniest part. Is that the one thing I was spoiled on didn't really answer a lot of immediate questions. It didn't explain why people were doing what they did. It didn't explain, the inner workings of Hinamizawa, or like who believes what and what's going on. What it did allow me to do is kind of blithely accept whatever was going on with Rika. Like, oh, she's stupid mature for her age. Oh, she's in places she really shouldn't be or have knowledge she shouldn't. And just kind of wave it off.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It allowed me to just kind of wave that stuff off with Rika. And it also allowed me not to think about why the serial narrative is happening. And you could argue whether or not those are big things or not, but aside from those two things, I really had to, that didn't deliver anything else to me. So, I hope none of y'all feel cheated. I think I did I honestly did the best that I could, and I think I did a good job of it, of making sure that my reasoning and stuff that came through, and the way I was talking about things was not filtered by that knowledge, or was not, and was not, set up in a way that if you were following along, that it would spoil you on it. In fact, I feel like it may have swung too far in the other direction and been like, I would have figured it out before then, but overcompensating, right?
That's a good thing to talk about. Do you think, if you hadn't been spoiled like this, do you think you would have pieced it together? And when? Do you think it would have taken until this chapter, or do you think you would have suspected earlier? I think it would have taken until this chapter, for sure. Because but I think I would have gotten it in the middle of this chapter. Okay. And
the reason being that it is a big leap to go for the time loop thing. And I think before that point, there's enough explanations outside of that I wouldn't have wanted to reach for something that big.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would have been reluctant to go for it before then, because bringing in that there is a time loop happening is a large hammer to bring in. It's not, and as soon as you open the door to all that kind of stuff, it really brings in a whole lot of like, well, why not other mystical things? Like, why just this? And I think until this chapter, where we learned directly what kind of knowledge Rika has about the future, why she knows things that she does, and that it's fallible and all that stuff. I think as soon as that started logging into place, that's when I would have been okay putting that theory on the table. I think I would have brought it up earlier as like a joke, but I don't think I would have committed to it until this chapter. Which also makes it wild that this originally wasn't supposed to be one of the question arcs. Like, what the hell? Really? That was supposed to go unsaid? Now, I hope aside from the few times we had to actually bleep stuff out where I was very conscious of the fact that I was violating that rule, I hope y'all felt like it still was a playthrough that you could listen to without delivering you to that answer. And if you didn't, well, sunk cost. You're here already at the talkback for episode 4, so chances are you're going to stay through the rest. Hey, we got him. I think that's. I think that's it. I think I did a good job of leading people there.
Yeah. Something else worth talking about while we're on this topic.
Yeah. Yep.
Sure seems like Rika knows a lot, but not perfectly.
Yep.
But what doesn't she know? Or is there anything she doesn't or can't know?
That's a very good question. Because like whatever Rika knows is stuff that she's either learned herself or so like skills that she has learned. Like so she's taught herself how to do a lot of homemaking things over the however many years. It also has to be stuff that she has been. I guess the fault here is that she only knows what she has seen or what she has been shown.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't know the internalities of the people doing those things.
Mm.
She can make educated guesses. She can come to some assumptions or gather corroborating evidence. But she doesn't have a window into, say, Keiichi's head like we do.
That's true.
She doesn't have the ability to know precisely why things are happening. And while she's probably better positioned to make those assumptions, make those conclusions, draw those conclusions, she also can't perfectly know. And given how many different not plots, but how many different people in Hinamizawa can have their various things rise to the level where it will affect the town, it is understandable that it would be very difficult for someone to take all that disparate information and try to synthesize it together, or why it's taken this long. It's also why she's kind of like been It's also why it feels like maybe she's like a step behind some things, because she's following up on the things from the previous route, right? It's why she's getting into the fight with Shmion from last time, because she didn't notice the first time, but the second time around, she's like, "Hey, hold on, you're not Mion, are you? What's going on? What's going on, girl?" So yeah, it does create. While she does have a lot more information than everyone else, it does create this huge blind spot where it's only stuff that she's able to put together on her own. And furthermore, at least from what we've seen, she seems very reluctant to bring other people in on this. She tried reaching out to Akasaka in Chapter 4, but that's the first time we've seen her doing that. In the past, it's been implied that she's been using like calls to the planting evidence or anonymous calls to the police station to try to get them to move in and do and act on information she knows is going to happen, right? Leaving the wallet out there and stuff like that. But that is, without her level of knowledge, that is imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
Again. And also, she's just a little fucking kid. Who would believe her? No matter how mature she is, she's a child. And so it's easy to dismiss whatever she comes up with as, oh, this is fantasy or make-believe. Unfortunately for her, she is a prime setup for a Cassandra situation. Because, I don't know, if a tiny child came up to me and told me that, like, hey, I know exactly who's going to die and when in this town for the next 5-6 years, I wouldn't believe her. I would assume there was something else going on. I might be wrong, but without any other context, that's what I would assume would happen. I assume that she would be lying to me or telling me some kind of story. And I don't think I'm alone in that.
Looping back, we've kind of we've kind of veered back into stuff she knows but can't act on, or can't get other people to believe. But I'm curious, is there a specific event, maybe something concrete that she doesn't seem to know anything at all about?
Yes. She seems to have and I think this is a big one. She doesn't really know how she dies.
Yeah, that's funny, huh?
Yeah, which
how
is
could that be?
Horrifying when you think about it. All we know is that in all of these loops, she has died. Which means that she has Subaru's return by death. Or rather, Subaru has her return by death.
Yep.
Hey, just put that together.
What would that imply about what happens to her?
That implies that the way she dies is something she can't see coming.
Yeah.
And that and it's also strange because, like, on the one hand, like, if it happened over and over, you'd expect that she'd at least get a glimpse of whoever was doing it at some point. But on the other hand, we where was it? I feel like it was said somewhere that she was, like, drugged first, right? Which means that it's not the case that she doesn't know who's doing it because they keep her face from her. It's because whoever's doing it purposefully doesn't want her to know that they're killing her, which is
that'd be odd.
Yeah, that's a wild thing to just put out in the middle of nowhere, right? There are two possible explanations for that. Or there are at least two, but I'm going to go with two right now. One, it's someone close to her who wouldn't be able to get close to her otherwise. That seems strange because if you were just planning on killing them, then you could be like, hey, what's up, Rika? Could you grab that for me, turn around real quick, stab, and then bam, you've got what you wanted. But the fact that they're hiding their identity from her, and this is a conclusion I'm not certain of, but the fact that they're hiding their identity from her seems to weirdly imply that they know she can get information out of that.
That'd be odd.
That'd be super odd, right?
Are there other reasons you might wish to drug someone?
Yeah, to transport them somewhere, to make them do something else against their will. If you were drugging them, it's like, oh, because you need them to. I think the main reason you would drug someone before killing them is because you can't kill them where they are, and you need to move them somewhere. So and since she's being drugged before she's died, but we see where her body ends up in at least one timeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did we know if that was also the case in other one? Like, I don't
think we do
remember.
know.
I don't remember if we also heard about that in chapter 4 or not. But we'll go with chapter 3 in this time. In chapter 3, her body is splayed out on top of the offering box.
Yep.
At the shrine, where it's been dismembered. Not dismembered, disemboweled.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's important to be specific with the gruesome ways in which people die. But we know she also wasn't killed there. She was brought there. Hence why she was drugged. She was brought there and then disemboweled there. That level of intentionality is wild. And I have some ideas. They're not great, but I have some ideas about who did it. Was there an answer to your question in there? I feel like I'm just talking in circles now.
Yeah, there was.
Awesome. I'm so glad to have answers to questions.
Why? You can stop at any time.
I can't. It's right there. I got it.
Is there more stuff you want to say on this topic of Rika and time loops before we move on to the main body?
There is one thing I do want to add on to it.
Actually, there is one thing I want to ask as well.
Cool.
So you do yours and then I'll do mine.
Rika time looping is introducing a level of fantasy, of mysticism, of science fiction into an otherwise very grounded story. And I think that's also one of the reasons I would have resisted it up until that point. However, accepting that that is what is happening to Rika does not open the floodgates to other things. The reason we've like to cannibalism or literal I'm not cannibalism, like to literal demons, right? or other mystical things explanations for things. It doesn't just because time looping is there is not an excuse to start to stop thinking about what other events mean. I guess that's what I want to be clear of. The other thing is that I've had a pet theory for a while, knowing that and this is just not based on anything other than vibes, but my thought is that, oh yeah, Oyashiro-sama's curse is real, and Oyashiro-sama's curse is Rika having to time loop. Which seems not really based on anything, but just vibes. It'd be funny if the curse everyone was talking about isn't real, is actually real, but is something totally different. What were you going to ask me?
I was going to ask, how many times do you think she's experienced these events?
That's a great question. We see, the couple of versions in the story. We're not told explicitly whether or not that's all of them. My guess would be, and I don't know where we stand on this, but I would have to go back and see in chapter 1 kind of what Rika's sitch is. If like all the way back then, is she already canny and full of knowledge of the future, or is she still kind of like wide-eyed and a child? You know what I mean? Not someone who's been forced to confront death and then grow up and relive that scenario over and over. And I guess that would determine, like, are we starting in the middle of things? Are we starting at the beginning? And then from there we could extrapolate, like, has this gone on before? I'm tempted to say we see the entirety of it. If only because from a narrative standpoint, that's more satisfying. But, and especially for something where, like, the reader is expected to engage on a certain level and try to piece these things out, her having more information than, or like, her bringing in more information that we're still not privy to would be not impossible, but difficult to reason around.
Do you think she could pick up the level and type of knowledge we've seen her have over the course of the events we saw?
I do. Because I think what we see her doing is... Oh, hopefully you can't hear all those sirens. What we see her doing is very sort of single-minded and direct on focusing on individual solutions to individual problems. Like when she's taking out Shmion, it's because, which again, I'm just hard reading as Shion, back in chapter 2, or when she goes to do that, it's because that she sees that as the one lone deviant, the one lone actor in that. And I think implies that she doesn't necessarily have the full breadth of knowledge of what's going on in that situation to know why that might not work or stop everything. I think it's because she has an idea at that time that this will stop what's happening, but doesn't necessarily know all the other things that are going on that would lead to that.
Okay.
By chapter 4, we see her going to great and elaborate lengths to save a single life. In Akasaka. And it seems more like, and she says, like, finally, I have gotten to save you. It seems like it takes a lot, like it's doable, but it takes a lot of, for lack of a better thing, trial and error to make other people, to bring about other people's actions in a way that has the outcome she desires. It seems like getting just Akasaka to live has taken a couple of iterations of futzing around with, like, how do I place the wallet? At what point do I get them to act on this information? Like, what information do I seed where in order to get the outcome I want? And we all like to imagine that in like a time loop scenario where we have like that's the power fantasy of time loops, right? Is that you have knowledge, is that you are able to use that information to make yourself more knowledgeable and more frightening by the fact that you can tell what other people are going to do and when. And it's so fascinating that this tale is all about like, is she really all the better off? Like, look at how much struggle and effort it takes just to save one life on her part. Where most people, and again, she's a child. Most people won't even listen to her if she tries to say straight up what's happening. Akasaka, she straight up told Akasaka, I know who's going to die in this village. And he's like, wow, that's pretty intense. Does nothing for 6 years.
Jumping back to what you said a little while ago, I think there's an interesting consequence of this idea.
Yeah, hit me.
That if she's only seeing these same events we're seeing, she must be a better detective than us, right? Because, for example, in the whole Shmion murder arc, it's not that she already knows then that Shmion is going to go do a bunch of murdering. It's just that she was several steps ahead of us and figured it out before we did, or Keiichi could.
Yeah. But the thing is, she doesn't have access to the information. It's different. She doesn't have access to the same information we have. We have access, for the first 3 chapters, we have access to Keiichi's head. And that is very different than the information that she has. Although it's also not surprising that over several iterations, Rika has also learned how to like tell Mion and Shion's mannerisms apart. It would not be surprising to me if she was the third person who was able to just cold read those two. Because we know Oryou can, and we know Mayor Kimiyoshi can. It would, and that that's why they both have to die during that one chapter. But it wouldn't be surprising to me if Rika also, over several iterations of watching the sisters parent trap in each other's lives, that she also figured out how to do that. It's weird. Do we ever know if their dad can tell them apart?
I don't think we know.
I don't think we know. I think the fact that we don't know that if he dies or not during chapter 2 maybe implies that he doesn't, which is kind of awful, but also he doesn't really seem to be in their lives.
Deadbeat mafia dad.
Yeah, deadbeat mafia dad. Like he's not in their lives a lot, so I guess that checks out.
I mean, effectively, as far as we can see, Shion's driver is basically her dad. Like,
yep.
in terms of who's actually, like, looking out for her on a day-to-day basis and being like, okay, let's make sure the kid doesn't get in too much trouble.
Yeah. Yep.
That doesn't paint too rosy a picture of her biological father's involvement in things, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Anyway,
that's a whole lot about Rika.
That is.
Again, I hope y'all don't feel cheated or that I've just delivered this to you without any. That's why I wanted to start the talk back on that topic in particular, because going forward, I cannot ignore that.
Yep.
And this is the point in the game where you have the pieces. R07 kind of likes to do that, huh? Really lead you to these conclusions, but not say that crucial last step.
Mr. Detective, I gave you all the clues.
Yeah, exactly. It's I won't say with what, because it's, play the game, but Umineko does a similar thing where it'll lead you towards a lot of its answers without giving you that final, or one particular question, without giving you that final confirmation. It just... I kind of like that, relying, just keep giving this propensity of the evidence without ever saying the final thing. And just trusting the reader to get there. I like that. Anyway, let's do some questions.
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing next?
first, we haven't yet talked about the events of things
Oh,
for this
shit.
chapter.
We haven't. It's so wild. We were just starting with that. We never talked about what chapter 4, because chapter 4 itself is still fucking wild.
Yeah, wild, but also shorter. So do you
Yeah.
feel like you'd be prepared to give us like what's the 5-minute version of
Yeah, I can
things
do that.
from your interpretation now
I
that
could
you've
do
seen it
that.
all?
Yeah. So chapter 4 follows Mamorou Akasaka, a character who I think was maybe mentioned once before. I don't know this for certain, but I feel like his death was alluded to at one point. In one of the earlier chapters, is like, oh yeah, even somebody died before that, but I don't think we ever got a name for him or knew anything about him. I could be wrong about that. I could just be adding that back in. I will find out and be looking for that when I go back for my rewatch. Believe me. And if so it follows him kind of, chasing down this lead. We do learn about the kidnapping. I feel like because the kidnapping, I believe, was mentioned by Mion at some point.
The kidnapping was definitely brought up.
Yeah, the kidnapping was brought up.
I think all the way back in chapter 1.
Was it chapter 1 or was it chapter?
It was either 1 or 2. It
Either
was,
one
it was
or
well
during
near
one
the
of the
beginning.
big info dumps about the damn wars. I think
Yeah.
is when we learned that. But yeah, that was definitely. I got to admit, I didn't expect that at the time to be like one of the pivotal events. But it kind of is. Which makes sense because it comes back to the dam, right? This is all about. All of it comes back to the dam protests. All of it comes back to like something from outside making Hinamizawa have to change. And one wonders, like, without that outside influence, how would have Hinamizawa just continued on into the future, right? If change hadn't been brought there by force, would any of this have happened? Maybe. Some people in Hinamizawa are just independently kind of fucked up, but... Regardless, am I just giving the recap? Right. So we're following Akasaka, who is investigating one of several different potential groups that could be responsible for the kidnapping. At the beginning, they don't know who precisely is involved. They just have agents going out to investigate a bunch of different known entities, basically to cross them off the list. Akasaka's job is not to solve the crime. He is there to dot I's and cross T's, right? He is there to look into this and basically like give a good faith, nah, it ain't them. That's what they're expecting when they send him out. And unfortunately, reality keeps conspiring to make it more and more plausible that the lead he's running down is actually the one. You see him falling in with Ooishi, or after taking him a ride at or trying to take him for a ride at the mahjong parlor, turns around and gets on his side. We do finally see like what the topography of Hinamizawa is like during the Dam Wars, which is very fascinating. Because we've had allusions to it. We've been told in the past of like what's going on there, but being able to see firsthand like barricading off the town, constant loud protests at the dam site, making it impossible to work. Very much observing and giving handlers to outside people. There's a very it seems dramatic. It's very systematic, and it seems dramatic and overkill until you remember that it's about their homes, right? Like if they don't want their homes to be flooded, that in the mind of someone like that would justify a whole lot of stuff, even if everything we see them doing in those cases is legal and above board. All of the stuff we see with the Dam War protests is maybe shady, but completely above board.
Well, I don't think that's true at all.
Well, hold on, we're getting there. With one notable exception.
I still don't think that's true at all. I think a lot of the stuff they're doing is wildly illegal.
Okay, yeah, setting up barricades on public roads, yeah.
Sabotaging construction vehicles,
yeah,
assaulting people. There's a veneer of legal activity. Even the veneer of legal activity, it's still like the thing they're doing at the protest site is probably illegal, but they're saying prayers so that it can be seen as a religious activity and therefore be a loophole. Right. So it's less they're sticking to the letter and spirit of the law and doing only what's legal, and it's more they are doing absolutely everything they can, but trying to make it seem like
that's a much better take on it. Yes,
trying to get the optics right so that it doesn't look like they're just a bunch of marauders going around violating the law left and right and giving the police a reason to crack down immediately. It's similar to why they barricade the roads, but they open it up when Ooishi's around.
Because they know to keep their noses clean.
Yep.
At least in front of the people who can do anything about it.
Like, if Ooishi had been in his own car during some of those not had a stranger with him and so on, I bet there would be no barricade on that road at all.
Exactly.
Someone would have called ahead.
Exactly. You're right. I had forgotten about some of the more dramatic things because the game only presents us with like that veneer because that's all we see from Akasaka's viewpoint, which I guess is part of the point. Like, if you were just coming in there, you would only see the stuff that if you were just coming in there and they had known you were there beforehand, right, or on one of the buses or whatever, you wouldn't see any of the sketchier stuff. You would just see the veneer of rude but still fundamentally above board protest. So we got him. He's brought in. He's showing a good time, and he's seen. Oh, and he gets shown like a version of Hinamizawa that's actually rather, it's sanitized. He's with his handler. He's shown around a bunch of people, and I think the conclusion he draws from that is still fundamentally sound. That like, it's not the case that the town itself can be seen as a monolith. It's not the case that everyone in this town is in part of some grand conspiracy to doing they're like, because like what his remarks is that not everyone can be lying to me at every single point without any single fracture in it, right? Gets brought back. His wife's in the hospital. That's all good and normal. Surely nothing bad will happen with her. After that, and then he goes to play mahjong with Ooishi. It's after that night that they get the call about the wallet, right?
I think so.
Is that right? And then that leads them in to go into the village or to go into the neighboring village that you can only get to through Hinamizawa. Run by the doctor, find the kid, have a confrontation, and somehow come out on top. Despite everything. The kid is saved. Akasaka is saved. What's really funny about that is that Rika was only concerned with saving Akasaka. It's like the kid would have been fine in the other timelines, right? It's just Akasaka who eats shit. Oh, I just put that together. That's
I already had this on lock. I just dropped the wallet and people find it and they realize where the kid is and the whole kidnapping scheme falls apart. You idiots just rush in and get shot for no reason.
Anyway. And then we see the end where he goes to the festival, right? The very different feeling festival of a bunch of old folks sitting around and drinking with one another, which still great festival. But it definitely puts that version of the festival definitely puts a different spin on the versions of the ones of the future, where it's less about community and coming together and more like this kind of manic fear that if they're not putting on a good enough show that Oyoshiro-sama's going to kill someone again.
Wait, what?
Because remember that first year we see the Watanagashi festival, and it's very small and tame and a bunch of old folks.
Yeah.
And then in future years, it's this big to-do where everyone from the neighboring towns is expected to get together and put on this huge festival with a bunch of tents and this whole production. And it makes it seem like that whole thing is much less of a joyous community celebration and more of a manic fear that if we don't appease this god well enough, someone's going to die again this year. Like, there's a reason that swung so dramatically between in a couple of years.
Isn't there a positive reason as well? I feel like that was touched on.
Where they're like, oh yeah, this worked in the sense that like they're not coming back to resume the dam project, so maybe. Yeah,
we wanted Oyoshiro-sama to save us from the dam, and he did. Let's have a better festival.
Yeah,
let's
okay.
do a bigger festival.
Yeah, you know what? I admit I had overlooked the more positive version of that.
I think you're not wrong to look at the side of it that you're looking at, because that's definitely there. But I think
both are important, and you were right to bring that up.
It's not that everybody in Hinamizawa is being controlled by some shadowy something that is manipulating them through fear to do these particular things.
No. Anyway, Akasaka then hangs out, ass out in his hospital gown. I know the manga shows it with him in full clothing. I choose to believe. All right. I choose to believe he's still ass out in his hospital gown with his little hospital slippers running around everywhere, and that's funnier to me. And then he gets word that his wife died because he was away, because he didn't listen to the warning from the very sternly worded young girl. And see, I think that's the problem, is that no matter how forcefully she delivers that message, he's still going to look at her and see a young child, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like that's even when he's like, this isn't her I'm looking at, this is someone else, he still chooses to listen to that and be like, okay, well, I guess that's a thing you said. I'm going to still do my own thing now because I'm an adult who knows better. And I guess it's so weird to just completely outside context convince someone to run back to Tokyo and abandon their job. Moving along, we flash forward then at that point, right, when he and his daughter are now traveling to visit Ooishi in the future after the events because he needs closure on what Rika said to him. And then the two of them decide to try and investigate together. I refuse to start liking Ooishi. Categorically, I will refuse to start liking Ooishi. And then the two of them can't figure it out, so they implore everyone else to do it for them.
What do they end up doing?
They end up being like, we can't figure it out from what we have, but hopefully by showing this to you, the audience, you can figure it out.
Yeah,
and they produce a book called Higurashi When They Cry.
They do. So you have to mention the meta. It's Eskay core. You have to.
I was getting there. It's almost like that's what we're supposed to do with Higurashi When They Cry.
Write a book about it,
Mr. Detective. We gave you all the clues.
I will say, I find it very funny how your summary of the story almost entirely left out Rika.
She's there
throughout the entirety of it at all times, basically. I just find
there.
We talked about her beforehand, so I understand why you kind of skipped it over, but I do think it was very funny going through all of this and being like, oh yeah, and by the way, his wife died and he didn't listen to the warning. What warning? Oh, the warning from Rika, the person who's been here all along. We already
talked about Rika. Okay.
So that's
all
the
right.
events.
Are we all caught up? Are we all caught up?
I'm caught up.
We're over an hour in this and we haven't taken a single question from people yet.
Fuck.
That's impressive.
Okay. Well, we'll luckily there's a number of folks who basically ask the same question phrased different ways. So we're gonna make up for lost time.
We don't need to rush ahead. People like listening to us talk about this. Demonstrably. I have the viewing stats on this.
Do you feel ready for questions? Is it question time?
I think we've done everything we're going to do. We talked about the one thing we had to talk at the top, and we gave a recap, and now I think we're ready to go.
All right. So, I'm going to start us off with something that I think you might not answer, but I think we should explicitly address it first.
Sure, go ahead.
That is the grand unified theory. We got two folks asking about it. Artificial Devil asks, I'd like to just ask to hear you lock in a theory in the talkback. Since the answer arcs will start when you next pick up the series again, it's the perfect time to lock in. And Lady Burncastle says, who do you think is either in on the Great Hinamizawa Disaster or any of the different crimes that will occur? Now,
so, yeah.
I believe you have a different plan about your grand theory.
I do. Because, and I think we mentioned it at the end, but I want to reiterate this right here. I do plan on going back and rereading and rewatching all 4 of the question arcs again before we go on to the answer arcs. This is like the good breath checkpoint where, it's like good to lock in, like, you're right, this is the point to lock in the theory, right? The capital T theory. However, I haven't done one of the most important things of it yet, which is just rereading.
Yeah.
With the information we have now. So,
and legitimately, the events of chapters 1 through 3 are faint in our minds by this point, and in our discussions outside of this have often gone pretty far astray because of not remembering things.
Right.
So
I think it's important, and for me to, like, before we go on to the answer arcs, for me to actually sit down with my pen again and just go over everything and try to corroborate everything I can before getting to the very end. So I don't have a grand unified theory at the moment. I can tell you what my working theory is right now, when I'm going back for the rewatch. But I'm not ready to lock that in for my pre-answer arcs theory. But I'm ready. I'm okay with saying that this is my working theory of what's currently the shape of things when I'm going back to do my rewatch. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that theory is this: there is no single entity responsible for all the serial murders in Hinamizawa.
Spicy.
Yep. Every single year has been the result of a different group of people taking different actions in order to build upon this narrative and use the narrative to their own ends. The first time we see it is with the foreman, right? I still don't have a problem believing that the foreman's death was a result of the Sonozakis. I do believe that, I do believe that original one that original sin does lie with the family. The second year, I think, is completely coincidental. I think it is by pure accident that the Hojos happened to die on that day. But because that pattern is now established, that's what opens the floodgates for future years. The next year is the Furudes, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have a good lock on who killed the Furudes. I think we're also given the least information on those.
Yep.
I don't think Rika killed her own mom. As much as I think she doesn't like her mom, and as much of a bad of a mom as she is, I don't think Rika kills her. I don't think Rika kills her own mom. I think there is something else going on then that we're not totally privy to. The fact that her mom seems to commit suicide afterwards maybe lies the fact that she tried to kill, that maybe Rika's mother tried to kill Rika's father, and then Rika, after seeing that, did the whole, like, I know exactly what you did thing, and then maybe her mom, racked by grief, goes and commits suicide. I don't know. We don't get, to my recollection, we're not given a ton of information on those events, and I feel kind of okay with that as a working theory. Next year, Hojo's Part 2, right? Mm-hmm. Satoshi. I think we're given a pretty clear parallel analog of how this might work with Satoshi, or with Keiichi in Chapter 3. We're given a pretty clear analog of how that might have worked,
Mhm.
what Satoshi's mindset might have been, how he might have went about it, and I don't have any problem believing that. And as we see, Teppei's alive and well, so that's fine. And then the next year, which is the year of the game, right? And then that's chapter by chapter. I think chapter 1 is, again, working theory. I think chapter 1 is Keiichi just not listening to his friends. I think chapter 2 is Shion taking over Mion's life. I think chapter 3 is right, that's the one. I think with the Great Hinamizawa Disaster in chapter 3 and the murder of Rika, I think that's Rena, who is the guilty party there.
Which I still want you to give me a motive and a reason, but we can do that when we get around to the rewatch.
When we get around to that. Well, yeah. You want a motive and a reason. And then chapter 4, I think we don't really have... Chapter 4 is just all... We see it ends with the Great Hinamizawa Disaster. So I can only assume that someone gave Rena the keys to the nukes again. Is that... There, that's my working theory. That's not me saying that this is locked in and perfectly what I believe. It's saying that this is my baseline for understanding the events when I go back and look at them. And then... and while being perfectly open to having myself surprised or mind changed. We good? We're good.
Yeah, I think so. I guess the only other thing worth spinning out for grand working theory is what's up with the first deaths, the Watanagashi deaths that we see in each of these.
Right. The other thing is that
because that's the continuation of the deaths from
Tomitake's
before.
death.
So if we're going on a theory, all of these are somebody different with a different motive. What's going on this time?
Right, you're right. I completely skipped
I think you have a
I think Tomitake's death and Mio's death are staged by Mio, who I've speculated wildly as to why that might be. We don't really know what her deal is, but I imagine that she has some reason to want this to continue. I don't know. She doesn't seem to particularly want Tomitake, of all people, dead. They seem to have a good relationship. I don't know how he wronged her, but yeah, I think those are staged by Mio for reasons that are as yet unclear to me.
Fair enough. Working theory on record.
Yeah. It gets more palatable with each sip, which I don't like.
I can tell you why, and it has very little to do with the flavor and a lot more to do with the ABV.
Yeah, I know.
You can stop consuming it at any time.
I can't. It's right there. Who else is going to consume it? It's so wet. It's ready to go.
The sink will consume it for you. Okay, let's get into some of the questions from Discord.
Sure.
So
I promise not to give every single person a yo this time.
That's unfortunate.
Oh, okay, I will.
So I've tried to kind of arrange these into some broad subject areas. And we're going to start with broader themes and then gradually narrow it down to characters. So
sounds good.
First broad theme I want to ask you about.
And these are for chapter 4 specifically, right? Yeah.
First thing is the supernatural. And we get two questions that I think are related enough that we may as well talk about both at the same time.
Sure.
Lulu asks,
yo,
to what degree do you think something supernatural is affecting the story, and how does that change your deductions, if at all?
Mm-hmm.
And Mushroom asks, how do you think this additional chapter 4 helps or harms your understanding of what is happening in Hinamizawa, since Eskay has been very mystery core and not mystical core?
Oh, I forgot to give Mushroom a yo. Yo, Mushroom!
So I think that's kind of...
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
And the way I've been seeing it is this. And I think I've already justified my use of the mystery here, but of the mystical here. The use of my theory is this, or my mindset is this: the use of the mystical in this story is, and in any explanation, should be a last, it should be a method of last resort. It's not to say that it can't be used to explain things, as it's the explanation for what's going on with Rika. However, it should, opening the door to mystical explanations does also open the door to a potentially lazier way of thinking about things and just explaining them with mystical stuff, which is what the game is constantly trying to warn us about. So, when it comes to me and mystical theories, it's a theory of last resort. It must be because there is stuff that cannot be reconciled and limited to that one use, and limited to that use without excusing mystical thought, or without excusing having to think about things in other places. And so with that in mind, the extent at which I think the mystical is affecting this is as minimally as possible in order for things to make sense. If we know that Rika is time looping, is there an entity that granted her that, or is it just a fact of the world? It could be easy to be like, oh, if Oyashiro-sama is granting her this ability to time loop, why, maybe Oyashiro-sama is causing all the deaths. That's not satisfying. I'm not saying I won't reach for that if I absolutely need to, but I doubt I will. And I will only do so if all other explanations fail. And while I think reaching for it in the case of Rika, in the case of Rika's knowledge, is justified in that that's an extraordinary thing, I'm not convinced that other things can't be explained by humans and their actions.
Do you think then that the time loop is the only supernatural element?
I'm tempted to believe it is. But again, it would be hypocritical of me to say that there's not the possibility of other things. It's just that, with my attitude, I will not... I will want to exhaust every possibility first before leaning to that. And this might be a failure of me to accept the way the story wants to be taken, but it really does feel like just accepting them, I guess this is the problem with reading Umineko first, right? You don't want to just accept what's put before you. And not in the way of that it's not important, but in that why is it important that things be shown as mystical?
Mm-hmm.
We've been given a narrative here in Higurashi about how much work and stock has been put into upholding this very false but mystical narrative, and what benefits and downsides that holds for the people who live there. And I do think that while there could possibly be other mystical things happening, I don't want that to be a reason for me to not think about why everything is happening and who's doing it. If I do reach for another mystical theory, it's going to be because I've reasoned that that's the only explanation for something left, and that I can itemize the other things and tell you why they're less likely or not possible.
Fair enough. I do want to briefly shout out, I think it's cool and fun how Ryukishio 7 has written a work where it and its sequel can kind of be read in either order and it'll still work. I knew Higurashi first before we read Umineko, and that gave me a certain expectation heading into it that was not accurate. And you've read Umineko before getting around to Higurashi, and you've come into it with a certain expectation that is not accurate.
In some ways, it's both helping and also again sets up expectations.
Yeah,
it's
a cool writing trick. It's hard to write a sequel to a thing that can simultaneously be read as a prequel to it, and either order kind of still works, especially with it being a mystery type mystery or mystery adjacent of all things. That would feel like the hardest thing to write a sequel to that doesn't simply spoil the answer. But
it's,
there you go. Good stuff.
Oh, man.
Let's do another.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a different theme.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the background lore.
The background lore. Okay, yeah.
So here we again get two questions that are pretty related.
Mm-hmm.
Cat Agent 101 asks, what are your thoughts on the Oyashiro-sama lore and how or if it's connected to the various mysterious events we see throughout the chapters? And Volition asks, do you have any new theories for the basis of Mio's stories about the Oni, Oyashiro-sama, and the Watanagashi?
Okay. So that's really fascinating, right? Because we don't know where the lore about this town comes from.
Yeah.
It's just, and without any other thought, it's tempting to think that like, were these all just stories about the town that were passed down for a long time? Like like that's perfectly acceptable as an answer, but also kind of means that there's not a whole lot we can do but looking into their origins. I think they provide a very interesting... No, let me state that over. I think at first blush, the service that the stories about Hinamizawa's past provide is a simple and thoughtless explanation for what's happening now. I think they provide the very base level, like in terms of what they serve to the narrative. I think they provide like the base level explanation for, you can just think that this is demons eating people and not think about anything else. That is always an option. If all else fails, you can just call upon demons and be like, oh yeah, demons who eat people did it. And that will be an acceptable explanation for what you're seeing. It's not satisfying, but it's always an option to just accept what's been put before you. Why was Rika disemboweled on top of the offering box? Demons who eat people. There we go. We're all happy now, right? There. I think one of the interesting things about the folklore of Hinamizawa is we get an idea that it's been there for a while, right? I think we've heard in chapter 4, when we're the farthest back of the past, we still hear all of these stories, or at least allusions to them, right? And Ooishi's grandmama was even telling him about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which does say that these things have been there for a while. These are not recent developments. I think that's important because like if it's not like some recently discovered ancient folklore that happens to explain what's happening now. These stories weren't created ex post facto to hide modern events. They were, I think, maybe cynically co-opted by people in the modern day in order to give a more mystical flair to their very grounded killings. And we see that has a measure of success in the future, right? People worship of Oyashiro-sama seems to be much more intense and fervorous in the future than it is in that year. People at large do seem to be connecting the ongoing murders to that folkloric history. The one thing that really gets me is the way that it ties into the Sonozakis' history with the canned flesh incident. That seems like too perfect.
So on the nose, right? They've already got this centuries-old legend about man-eating demons, and then
they just happen to make their money off of that. And it's like, that's the one thing that would give me pause, right? that would make me think that while these might be older than the narrative we see in the story, they're not that old and maybe came about as stories about the Sonozakis themselves.
Could there be another reason why it would end up that on the nose? Spin the chessboard a little.
Yeah, like why might it end up that? Maybe it's because, that's not actually what happened, and it's kind of the convenient fiction people came up with to describe them. Like, oh, you made your money. You made your money selling army surplus rations and got really rich doing it. However, we happen to have this folkloric history here that ties into cannibals. So wouldn't it be cool if we just labeled you a cannibal and said that was all canned flesh? Something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure how else to spin that around. I've kind of taken it that like that event did happen. And if it wasn't canned flesh, why would that they would have said something about it? But also it's a super strange thing for the army to have tried doing, or defense force, right? This is was it the
whole reason it's the JSDF nowadays is because of the aftermath of World War II.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's my thought about that.
All right.
I do think the interplay of like who tells the story and when it came around is important and something I want to watch for going back. Because if it's a modern story, then someone benefits from telling it. But the fact that it slots in so well does make me think that there might be another explanation there. There doesn't have to be. My theory for like the Hojo's deaths in of Watanagashi is that it is just coincidence. I am not above reaching for it's just coincidence. But
and that's good.
But I do think, but it does give me pause to think about that, and it does make me want to look into it more.
One thing that I find it's really easy to do when looking at mystery fiction is to fall into the trap of thinking everything has to have a reason, and the reasons all have to be related, and there has to be one big explanation for everything. But, step outside your door. Is that true in real life?
No,
it's not.
The thing is, and I think the Higurashi's done a great job of doing this, is that there's a lot of disparate people with a lot of disparate motivations. And I think that's why it's hard to come up with a grand unifying theories, because it's not one actor or one group of actors. It's a bunch of different actors with their own agendas and motivations. Anyway.
Long story short, I am proud of you for supposing that some things just happened, that it's just a coincidence, because, it may well be that is the most plausible explanation, that some of the things we're seeing, weren't related and other ones were.
If we're going to talk about that for a moment, I do want to justify it a little bit more, because I think saying something is a coincidence, there is explanatory power to that. I think the second year after that killing, it would have taken a lot of chutzpah to be the person to be the first person to be like, you know what, I can do this myself and just claim it's an ongoing thing. I think it takes less effort in the future after there has already been a coincidental second death that is no one's fault. Because now you can say like, oh, I wasn't, this is an ongoing thing at this point. I don't have to establish the narrative. The narrative has been established for me. All I have to do is play into it. So I do think it's just coincidence is also doing a lot more lifting in that case than is initially clear. Hello, Sirens. Why is it so... What has it been with this past week here?
We had we had 3 days in a row of car accidents on the roads that we are on, like in basically the same place, like clockwork each day.
And it's not even winter yet. It's not like the roads are icy or anything. It's just peeps driving.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
So that's all I have about the lore.
Sure. I hope my answer was satisfying there.
Yeah. Let's talk about the general area where I have a lot of questions for you and a lot of ones that are a little bit more specific.
Sure.
Let's talk about the timeline. Now that we know some things about the timeline and how they're related and so on, and what we do or don't know from Word of Rika.
Yep.
I think it's interesting to reflect on some stuff.
Yeah, okay, sure.
So, first thing is this. From Volition, what are your current thoughts on what's happening in the opening scene of Chapter 1?
Okay.
Jumping all the way back to that very beginning with the context we just got in Chapter 4.
I scarcely remember it. It's like asking for an apology, right? It's where it feels like someone's body is being hacked apart and they're asking for an apology. Or no,
they're apologizing.
I'm mixing that up with Keiichi's monologue about like why wouldn't you let them apologize, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's something they can't take back, all the more reason to accept that apology. It's been a long fucking while, okay? But the opening scene is of a body being dismembered, right? I think. There's the chopping sound.
Yep.
Yeah. I apologize that this isn't satisfying at all. I don't have it in my head right now. And without it in my head, I don't know that I can give a good answer. I feel like with a lot of the context we're hearing now, I could go back and look at that and give you a better answer, but without it immediately fresh in my head, I don't want to misspeak.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I know that's kind of a cop out, but I don't have it freshly in my mind right now, and I hesitate to give a confident answer on something that I haven't read very recently.
Let's talk about something different then. Lady Burncastle asks,
Yo!
What is your current position on the Great Hinamizawa Disaster and on Ooishi apparently surviving it at least once?
Yeah.
Along with those who were some of those who were missing in Chapter 3. Any changes from how the site is treated in the future, along with Ooishi just living on and having a regular retirement?
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating that in the future, or in Chapter 4, I think we've noticed this while playing, is that there are multiple survivors.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just Ooishi. In Chapter 3, it was important because there was only Keiichi, and Keiichi wasn't talking.
Yep.
In Chapter 4, there are multiple survivors, but people who they've gone their own ways and are quiet to talk about it, right? I still think some of the reason why that is that the JSDF has a vested interest in downplaying their own potential incompetence in allowing this event to happen. Right. My ongoing theory being that it is chemical weapons of some kind that were released on the town, and not a natural gas explosion, and that by quarantining it off for that long into the future, that they're hoping to remove any evidence of their own potential negligence in allowing that event to happen. So yeah, I don't think how it happens is perfectly set in stone. I think in Chapter 3, like there was this long to-do about like how, if only that one person at that one time had gotten some kind of information out, maybe think someone could have been saved, right? And then in Chapter 4, we do see an effort that like, oh yeah, more people were saved. It was still a huge disaster, but there are other survivors. Rika's trying. Kind of hard when she's destined to die at that point, but she's trying. Did that answer everything about that? I kind of lost track of where I was when I was talking about Hinamizawa Disaster.
Do you think there's anything different in the future of these various iterations of Hinamizawa we've seen? We talked a little about one of them, 3 and 4. Some more folks survive, but
in 1 and 2, we don't really know. We just don't know. I don't think it would happen because Rena is dead, but that's just me and my wild theory. In chapter 2, we don't see it happen, or rather, it isn't mentioned, and we do go several months into the future, right? So it would be strange if it had happened. Keiichi seems to move back into his house fine, so I guess that says no, it didn't happen. Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, it didn't happen in chapter 2, because why would Keiichi move back into his home in order to get stabbed? Right? Yeah. No. Okay, I'm confident on this. And also, they went and investigated the well, however many months after the fact, and that would have been in the quarantined area if Great Hinamizawa Disaster had happened.
Yep.
Okay. No, I'm confident. It doesn't happen in chapter 2. Chapter 1, we don't know. We don't know explicitly, but I am dollars to donuts. It didn't happen. Yeah. So those futures are wildly different, huh?
Yeah.
I still don't know what to make of fucking Kuma-chan dying.
That's funny, because this is the next question that I was going to ask you.
Oh, hit me.
So from Lady Berncastle again, any thoughts on Kumagai apparently having his disappearance become a reoccurring thing for chapters 3 and 4? Chapter 3 credits has him also has gone missing during an investigation with Ooishi.
It's so, like, he's such a non-character that I don't know, like, what to say about him.
Yeah. I don't think we know too much about Kuma-chan other than his amusing nickname.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe we can extrapolate something from the fact that they were in town that day. Like maybe someone had called them and tried to have them investigate something and stop it before it happened. Right? Like maybe Rika did try to call the police and be like, "Hey, I don't know what, something is happening and I don't know what."
And maybe this time around, Ooishi's blackout drunk at the mahjong parlor instead of answering the phone at the police station, so Kuma-chan has to go it alone.
And again, I really don't know what to make of. I think the only thing we can really think about is that they're in town for a reason. And it's a couple days after Watanagashi, right? At that point, so maybe they're looking into Tomitake's death still. There's a couple of plausible explanations for why they're there, but it seems very specific that they happen to be in town on that day. And my gut reaction is that Rika tried to call for help, and it wasn't enough. But I don't know why that would end up with only Kumagai dying in chapter 4 and not Ooishi. Being blackout drunk at the mahjong parlor, maybe. Yeah.
Let's talk about another.
Let's do it.
Lady Berncastle asks...
You already got a yo. You don't get a second yo.
What do you make of how the two events this chapter centers as the big events to stop? Rika's death, apparently... Sorry, I'm garden pathing myself here.
Go for it.
There we go. What do you make of how the two events this chapter centers as the big events to stop? Rika's death, one of them apparently being a set event that always happens, either didn't happen in chapter 1 or happened after our viewpoint character died and that story ended.
That's another very interesting thing, isn't it? I don't know that we know what happens to Rika in chapter 1. Because the person I had fingered for it, which is Rena, is dead.
Yeah. Sure is.
Sure is. So either Rika would have either A, she would have had to have killed Rika before that point. B, Rika is killed by someone else, or C, she doesn't die? But she seems to say she'll die every time, so that's not really an option.
And it'd be odd if a different person killed her,
for
but
a
in the
completely
same
different reason.
Well, not that. People die for different reasons all the time, but it'd be odd if a different person killed her in the same way, ensuring she can't get a peek.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the bit that seems weird, that there's this consistent thread.
Yeah, and it's like I'm so caught up on that detail. Like, does it mean that they know that she can use this information in the future, or are they trying to prevent against something else? Or is it just because they need to move the body and getting her while she's asleep is the easiest thing to do? Probably that, but like, what if? I don't know. If I was Rika and I kept dying in from people not watching me, I would just grab some caffeine and stay up for 78 hours or whatever and be like, I will do anything to get a look at whoever's killing me right now.
You think she's tried that? She's had a couple goes of it, right?
Yeah, I wonder if she has.
It feels like that would be one of the first things you'd try, and it seems like if she has, it hasn't worked.
Yeah, which is fucking wild. I don't know what to make of that, and I'm not going to bullshit a theory off the top of my head right now, but it's wild. Anyway. Yeah, so I guess I don't know, shot in the dark. I guess that means maybe Rena already killed her. But I mean, we don't know that she was killed in the same way. She said she was always killed in. Did she say she was always killed in the same way, but she doesn't know who?
I don't think she could know how she's killed, right?
She's
dead.
But into her mind, she always knows that or rather, it's consistent that she doesn't know because she's not there to see it.
Yeah, she knows she dies, and she knows she doesn't know who or how, but...
Gotcha.
I don't think she knows what happens to her body and all that.
Well, it means that she's not attacked violently and openly. Right?
Yep.
Right. I think that's the important thing, is that she's given no chance to see who is attacking her. That's the part that I was in on. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe she's already dead. She'd have to be, right? No, she wouldn't have to be. But it would be weirder if she wasn't. See, this is the kind of thing I'm going to be paying attention for when I go back and actually rewatch, because I don't fucking know. I guess she, if you want an answer out of me right now, I guess it makes more sense that she'd already be dead. But I couldn't tell you why. That makes sense. I mean, I couldn't tell you why it would have happened. Anyway.
Let's talk about another.
Yeah.
Lady Burncastle asks, do you think that Irie died in chapters 1 and 2? After Keiichi, seems like Rika must have. Now that both the episodes 3 and 4 had him die in the same way. Alternatively, do you think there's room for him to have died before Keiichi and for him not to have learned of it?
I don't think he's dead in chapter 1, because I think he's about to be introduced to him.
Is this the first time you've said that?
Maybe it's the first time I've said that out loud.
Okay, let's spin that out. That's new. What makes you think that?
It was the doctor.
Okay.
The doctor, the manager.
Okay.
I think it would make most sense if he was just the doctor. I think Rena and probably Shion are like, hey, you want to meet him? And
Do you remember what they're talking about before they say they're going to call someone?
We're going to do to you what we did to Tomitake.
No, but not just that. Do you remember they talked about a topic?
No, I don't. Was it baseball?
It had something. Yeah.
It was baseball.
There's a bat kicking around. They talk a little bit about, I didn't know you were getting into baseball.
They're literally just trying to make Keiichi a little bit happier. They're like, Keiichi, we see that you're really struggling, and maybe you'd be happier if we had a baseball team.
now that you're clearly, getting into baseball, carrying a bat around and practicing and so
why
on,
don't you come
we should
play
get you set up on the team.
Yeah, it's. I really think Keiichi's about to be introduced to the baseball team at that point. Oh wait, and it is Mion that dies there, not Shion, right? Because of the autopsy. So yeah, he is just about to be introduced to Mion and Shion and Irie, the two people who lead the local baseball team, and be like, "Hey, why don't you go play baseball? I'm sure that'll help you out with whatever's going on with you, buddy. You seem to be having a really rough time of it, and we're your friends, and we really desperately care about you, and we're showing that to you in the only way we can, and you seem unable to accept happiness from other people at this point." So yeah, I think that's what's about to happen there. I don't think there's any subterfuge in that beyond it's just unclear from chapter 1's context who they are referring to.
That's fun.
Yep.
So, if that's the case, he's still alive then at that point. Do you think he dies later? Do you think that he still offs himself?
I don't see why he would. I think him offing himself seems to be tied to something that also causes the Hinamizawa disaster to happen.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Spin that out.
Well, that's the thing. Is like we've talked about how Irie's death is one of the most puzzling ones out of all of these, since we seem to have such little context.
Fucking nothing.
Right? And so I don't know that I have anything more to it other than an observation that the only two times we see him die, apparently by suicide, are the two times when the Great Hinamizawa disaster happens.
Yep.
I know correlation, obviously correlation is a harsh mistress, but it's. I've got 2 data points and I'm drawing the conclusions I can.
Correlation equals causation. That's how it works.
Yep, that's how it works. Or rather, correlation equals correlation. I'm not saying that he's the reason that these happened, but something about the events that causes the Great Hinamizawa disaster to occur also cause him to commit suicide, or apparently commit suicide.
Fair enough.
That's what I've got right now, but I've been on the record about this. We know, we get so little about why he kills himself. You even said it as you said it was like one of the most mysterious things about the early chapters is why he dies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, man. You got so much out of me. Now you want me to pull this out of my ass?
To be fair, maybe the police just get winds of the photos he has on the secret hard drive in his office or something. Dude is a bit creepy. It could just be that there's some bad shit going on.
I don't know.
It's just weird that it seems to happen.
Maybe it's tied to him hiding the fucking minister's son that one time.
Years later,
the police are like, "Hey, we know you did this," and he's like, "Shit. Well, can't hide from that." I don't know, man. I've got nothing. I've got nothing.
I do think it's interesting, though, thinking about what the connection could be between this disaster and that death, and what, does he know something, or does he feel guilty for something that's gonna happen, hasn't happened yet, or?
I feel like I feel like suicide in his case. He doesn't seem like it's someone to commit suicide out of despair. He seems like a pretty happy person who, if not happy with his life choices, has at least accepted them. He's like, yeah, I'm a mob doc, and I'm doing what I can in that station. From what we see of him, he doesn't seem like someone to commit a suicide of despair. I do think if it was suicide, it would be more likely to be a suicide of guilt. At least that's my hard read on it. So I guess looking from that lens, it'd be we'd want to look into what would he be guilty of? The one thing we know he's guilty of is not telling the cops where he's not the one thing he's guilty of. He's a mob doc. The one thing he's very obviously guilty of and it was like knowing where the kidnapped kid was and saying nothing to the cops when he had a chance. She's got him dead to rights on that. Either that, or it's something he's guilty of that we don't know of. Maybe he's guilty of somehow inciting the Great Hinamizawa Disaster. Correlation and causation, baby!
He hands over the keys to the big Hinamizawa destroying machine and then immediately regrets his choices and is like, well...
Maybe he's not that... Maybe he doesn't have a choice and he's like, oh, well, here you go. And I guess I'd rather not die from gas, so I'll die by this way. There's another variant of it for you. I don't fucking know, man. I've got so many answers for so much of this game, and I've got nothing for this guy.
Fair enough. I have one more timeline question for you then.
Timeline?
From Lady Burncastle.
You got a yo.
Yeah. Based on what you've seen of the dam protest and its resolution, what expectations do you now have about the potential role that the halted dam project, its proponents, or the national government might have in the future events or scenarios of the earlier arcs, if any?
It's a really good question. I think it's important that the way the dam wars were resolved was with nothing written on paper.
It's just postponed. It's not canceled.
Just postponed and not canceled. That means the government itself has an ongoing interest to make it happen when it can. In chapters 3 and 4, with the Great Big Hinamizawa Disaster, they seem to be unable to, based on the fact that the area is now contaminated with gas, I guess, and it's being quarantined rather than developed further.
Hinamizawa is saved!
Hinamizawa is saved. Ultimate Pyrrhic victory. In chapters 1 and 2, though, I have to imagine at some point down the line when the killings stop happening, the government comes knocking again and be like, hey, so about that postponement, how we all feeling? I think it's really telling that one of the big set pieces for chapter 1 is the ongoing dam construction site.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's something that's always in the background, this looming threat over the town that never really goes away, even if it's kind of out of sight or out of mind for a while. The fact that it's never formally resolved and like we're not doing this means that the government's always going to be waiting for its chance to come back in. In chapter 4, they seem to read that as, they're not officially ending it because they can't, because there's a lot of money or a lot of there's a lot of stuff tied up in this, and you can't just end a big project like that, but with the knowledge that they're going to postpone it and then quietly cancel it later on. But that seems to be at odds with the protests no longer happening and any barrier that they would have had to doing that just disappearing. So if it's not officially written in ink, why wouldn't you go back and finish it? It's going to be the biggest project since Kurobe. It's going to be amazing.
Do you think any differently about the government's motives? Or, the government side of things, now that we've gotten a peek inside in chapter 4?
Yes. They seem most occupied with covering their ass. They seem most occupied with presenting an air of things going as smoothly as they can. They of not doing anything that would delegitimize their position within the party, or at least the person who's in charge of the dam project specifically. And it's that focus on propriety. That's the correct. Is that the correct word there?
That's a word.
Yeah, it's that focus on like how they are showing themselves that makes me think that they would absolutely go to great lengths to cover their ass for their own incompetence. Right.
Do you think the government is, one united interest, everyone working toward the same thing?
No, not at all. But I do think that the interest of the party and being seen as in alignment with the interest of that party is kind of an overriding unifying interest, in the sense that you always want to be seen as in line with that.
Did it unify the folks we saw this time around?
No, not at all. But it made it made them want. It made it so that their end goal wanted to seem in alignment with it. Clearly, the person who it's not director. What is it? What is his position? Minister. The minister was totally willing to capitulate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He just wanted his grandson back, which reasonable. And that's not in lines with the party's image.
I think it's really interesting to keep this in mind. You can go through the earlier chapters and get the sense that, the government wants X, the government did X, did Y.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see this and you learn a number of interesting things. One, that, someone's actively blackmailing the Minister of Construction with the kidnapping of a child, and he's prepared to capitulate, and indeed does. We also learn that the police already had him bugged before this illegally. So they already had some reason that they were like
watching this guy.
But also we find out that the kidnappers had access to his house, including locked drawers, and knew his private movements. So, and the kidnappers, we assume, are probably not in favor of the dam.
No.
So it's like, wow, this thing that looks like this one united monolith that's going to create this dam and steamroll Hinamizawa and crush it under its heel is actually kind of a shit show under the hood.
With a whole bunch of different people with their whole bunch of conflicting interests. Wow, it's almost like that's an ongoing thing. Wow, that's really that rhymes.
Anyway, I think that's a fun one to think about, especially as we go forward into the answer arcs or revisit things.
To look at the specific interests of the different groups or people and factions involved, rather than just the government.
All right. So that's what I got for broad themes. But
I do like broad themes.
I think there's some interesting things to chat about with some of the characters.
But I like characters more.
I see.
That's a lie. I like them both equally.
Let's talk a little bit about our new guy.
Yay!
Let's talk about Akasaka.
Yeah!
So, Lady Burncastle...
Hidden deuteragonist Akasaka.
Lady Burncastle asks, what are your expectations, if any, for Akasaka as a character going forward with how he was introduced?
Okay.
Do you think he's come back? Do you think we'll hear more about him?
It's strange, right? Because whether or not he comes back is tied into what I think the answer arcs are going to look like. And from experience with Umineko, right, I take it like the answer arcs are probably going to be different. In like I don't. There is, and I guess that's now answering a different question, but I do think like what his role is tied up in like what the answer arcs are actually going to look like. If the answer arcs are more of the same, like more of these repeating these months in Hinamizawa, then I don't see why he might not turn up. But it feels like Chapter 4 is kind of signaling that is played out now. Like, they've done what they needed to do there. Not that there won't be more looks at Hinamizawa in that time, but, like, by giving you the little peek under the hood now, they've kind of the authors kind of made the statement of what they want to with these things, and are now maybe transitioning into looking at people grappling with that story. So rather than constantly just giving us more about the firsthand accounts of those events, moving into accounts of people who are impacted or are themselves examining those events. And imagine Akasaka is well placed for someone to be in a story like that. As someone whose life gets saved by Rika and then potentially has a very deep interest in what goes on in that town. I don't know. I'm sad we didn't see Keiichi this time, but also like it's kind of cool getting a new perspective on it. And it's an RO7 work. He's not done introducing characters.
He's not done introducing characters until you wrap up the final chapter and maybe the bonus material also.
Yeah, exactly. There's the one thing that I'll never accuse RO7 of is stagnating. like there's still more. There are going to be new characters. There's going to be new things and angles of looking at stuff. That's just how he writes. So I imagine in that case, Akasaka is just going to be, if he's not our viewpoint character going forward, he's going to be one among the cast going forward. But maybe that cast looks different now in season 5.
If he's one among the cast, do you think that we'll no longer be seeing the events, or do you think he'll show up in...
I don't know. I don't think we're done seeing the events, but I think we might be done seeing the events as they happen. I think our perspective is probably going to shift more into the future and more about the people unpacking the events and what they know and trying to piece it together, rather than just showing us more of the events and leaving it at that. I think there was something to be said for showing us the events happening over and over and letting us sit with that. But now that we're in the answer arcs, we're going to want people answering these questions. And the people best placed to do that are the people who are in our position outside of those events, looking at that information and trying to piece it together. At least that's how I think. I don't know. Maybe it's going to be a time skip to the year 2036. What happens in 2036? I don't know, but it better be related to the events of some teenagers from Japan in 1980s.
Another question about Akasaka. Volition asks, do you have any new thoughts on Tomitake, based on Rika referring to Akasaka as Tomitake Mark II?
That was so funny. Yeah, because my first thought was that our insert caricature is Tomitake, and then obviously you're meant to think that because Rika comes like, oh, hey, you're just like him. I don't know, man. It's kind of it kind of makes me think a little bit more about what Tomitake's role might have been if Rika sees them as parallels of one another. Maybe Tomitake was secretly there to bust things open from the inside. That's weird though, because he's been there since before the damn wars and before the killing started. So I don't know. That doesn't make sense. I don't know what we're meant to take from the comparison of these two characters. They both die on the Watanagashi for reasons that are... Well, no, it's not hard to explain in Akasaka's case. We know why he dies, or would have died. But I guess they're both ostensibly outsiders that become ingratiated to people in the town. Tomitake winds up sticking around. Akasaka doesn't.
They both bring a camera.
That's true.
They both lie through their teeth about who they are.
Still wild that we don't know who Tomitake is. I on the one hand, it bothers me. On the other hand, I think maybe it's a red herring. Maybe it doesn't matter who he is.
That would be really funny, wouldn't it? If it just turned out that there's like a CIA agent here in town, but it's not relevant to the plot.
Right. Well, it's like he's someone who's got a fake identity, but maybe the reasons he has a fake identity just aren't related to anything. maybe his involvement in this story is truly just as far as, or maybe Rika's like, oh, you're also a government agent. Like maybe Tomitake is a secret government agent embed. I don't fucking know. I feel like I've given so many I don't knows this time, and that feels really unsatisfying. I'd like to apologize for that. I
never apologize for admitting the limits of your own knowledge. It's healthy and good.
Okay, I won't apologize then. I don't know, and it can't be known. But untangling who Tomitake is something I want to at least have a better answer on when we get back from doing the question arc rewatch. But yeah, I really don't have any insight into why Rika compares the two other than their superficial similarities. But since she's got knowledge she shouldn't have, maybe there is something deeper to that. All right, we're back. I switched out my disgusting malt drink and now just have a seltzer.
A wise choice.
Nothing tastes better than the flavor of nothing.
This is why I don't like seltzer.
It's nothing, but nothing that's been placed adjacent to like some fruit.
It's nothing but aggressive nothing. Like this is the nothing that noths.
This is the thing that noths. Yep.
Anyway, let's talk about our favorite. Let's talk about Ooishi.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about Sadako Hojo not appearing in this episode.
Our favorite special boy.
Everyone's favorite special boy. All right, let's talk about him.
Lady Berncastle asks, what are your thoughts and opinions on Ooishi now that you've seen how he was, how he can be from the perspective of an actual ally, and knowing that the first victim was a gambling buddy of his?
Here's the thing. I refuse to let go of Ooishi on principle. That said, I maybe could come around to understanding him. And if we try to do so charitably, it feels like he seems to be one thing you cannot say about him is that he's not dedicated to finding the truth. Whether or not that truth is correct, whether or not the truth he's searching for is actually the truth, or whether he's going to be surprised by the truth he finds is a different story. It's also really interesting looking at his movements throughout the chapters, because in like chapter 2, he's going on about Keiichi specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which feels like, no, Keiichi was the one last chapter who you needed to be looking at. Last chapter, you had him looking at Rena. Feels like maybe he's always a chapter behind. Like Rika's trying to feed him the information, but she keeps getting it like one wrong. Because like she's reacting to what happened last time, and so they're like, that's the information Ooishi gets, and he's like, well, shit, that's not at all how it went this time. What do you mean? What do you mean Teppei Hojo died? I thought it was just the fucking Tomitake guy. All right, let's be as charitable as we can to Ooishi here. I think Ooishi is someone who fundamentally believes that in protecting his community. And I think he maybe the way he best believe, and I think he does believe in putting his life on the line in order to do that, which is not something I would say about a lot of cops. While he is often misguided or given incorrect information or just operating under the complete wrong assumption, I think he is both able and willing to do what he can to protect the village of Hinamizawa. And doing so often puts him at odds with the people who live there. I do think his motivation to find the truth of it is genuine, that we see at the end of chapter 4. And I do think his concern for the town is genuine. I think he's genuinely shocked when he doesn't find poppy farms underneath the Sonozaki compound. I think that, and like when you understand that that's what he's, or like weapons and stuff, and when you understand that that's the impression he's operating under, it makes his intensity towards certain people feel not justified, but understandable. Because he thinks that these kids are, like the kids that he's looking at are involved in a threat that threatens, in something that threatens the entire town. And in his mind, that justifies a certain amount of unpleasantness on his part, to put it mildly. I think he is a depiction of what one might best hope the cops do for them when they tell them something is wrong. I think while he is not a flattering character, I think the depiction of the way he takes his job is the most flattering possible angle on how the police might come in and deal with a situation like this.
The openly corrupt guy is the most flattering possible angle?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I said what I said and I stand by it. It's the most flattering possible angle because he is genuine in his desire to protect the town. He is openly corrupt, but he genuinely believes that someone in his position has a duty to put themselves at risk for the greater good of the town. And that is not a step that I think most people would take. It's also unfair to him that I'm kind of coming at him with like a perspective on policing that's very much influenced by where I grew up, so maybe that's unfair to him, but that's as good as he's going to get.
I do find it funny, though, that this chapter, the first one that really humanizes him and shows us all of these positive qualities.
Yep.
And heroism, and shines more light on his motive. One of his own good buddies was the first one to die. Of course he'd want revenge, and so on. Is also the chapter which exposes, yep, he's openly corrupt. He is on the take. That's a thing we didn't know before. It exposes his gambling addiction and unhealthy relation to alcohol.
Wait, what do you mean he's on the take?
He is assisting Akasaka, but he expects to be paid for his time.
Right, okay, yes. He's open, but also, like, he's openly corrupt. He has no... And I respect that more about him. I genuinely do. He has a position of power, and he knows how he can use it to fill his own pockets, and he is open about doing so. And I respect a person like that more than someone who tries to hide it under the veneer, under a heroic veneer.
I find it fun how both those sides of Ooishi come out at the same time. Because it's very much not we're learning about the hero cop and that he's fundamentally good. No, we're learning about this dude who is fundamentally human, in the same time as we're filling in more info about how he could be the guy that finally cracks the X group case and gets something that sticks. We at the same time find out how he's the same guy who would physically abuse a child in order to get information on a case, because those are the same guy and for the same reasons even. So, very, very flawed and human character.
Yeah. And that's what makes him compelling as a fictional character, I think. And that's what makes a lot of RO7's characters compelling, is that attention to dimension. And it rhymed.
Although I think what really makes him compelling is the air conditioning.
God, AC-chan.
Okay, so another...
Blow cold air on me.
Another bit of a tangent on Ooishi. Has seeing Ooishi... this is from Lady Burncastle. Has seeing Ooishi get positioned rather differently to the crimes, compared to the Oyashiro-sama's messenger thing he got before, prompted you to reconsider how you see any other characters? This applies to any characters, not just those that the narrative has put suspicion on.
It's funny how he gets the Oishiro-sama's messenger moniker, because it's almost like he's being fed information about who's going to die that year from Rika, and is trying to do due diligence and checking up on those people, right?
It also must suck for him because, like, he's still nursing the hurt of one of his buddies being the first murder victim.
Yep.
And now everyone's like, oh, you're the messenger of the murders. Whoever you talk to is going to die next. And he's like, fuck, I hope not. That's what I'm trying to prevent for the past 5 years.
Right? He's like, I'm trying, man. I'm trying. It is really interesting how the narrative explicitly calls you out almost for that, like, very surface level correlative thinking. Like, he visits them, then they die. He must be the messenger of death. I think I called him that at one point as well. You harbinger of death. But it was on me. I didn't turn the chessboard around. Maybe he knew and was trying to prevent it the whole time. I don't know if it's made me rethink any other characters. I think, other than that, it's kind of reaffirmed my commitment to wanting to understand the depth of what motivates them. But I do think the object lesson in not accepting things as they appear on the surface and taking the easy answer is appreciated. In that there's always a different way to read things. I don't know that was a very insightful answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Man, I am just coming up short on a lot of these questions.
You are in no way.
You
are asked questions that you did not expect. You were doing your best to answer them, and you were doing so. That's all folks ask.
If I'd known I was going to get attacked during this interview, I would. Coming for me personally, jeez. All right, what else we got?
Let's talk a little bit about the Sonozakis.
All right.
Lady Burncastle asks, having seen how the Sonozaki family apparently operates, the particular style to Oryou putting forward her wishes as something for others to go and do something about without giving actual orders.
Right, the whole won't someone rid me of...
Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?
Yeah, exactly.
How does this affect how you see their influence and direction as an organization?
Right, it seems... That makes it seem much less like they can act as one unified entity and more like they are a bunch of people acting under one kind of nebulous banner, but within pockets that they themselves are taking initiative for. Because nothing should be getting back to Oryou. She has not explicitly directed anything, right? Mm-hmm. And she takes pains not to do that. But that means the people that are carrying out her will in that case are very isolated and insular. It is these people taking on this action without explicit backing from the larger group. Right? It's not like anyone's going to stop them if they say, like, hey, can we borrow this shed out in the woods for a while? Don't worry about it. Right? No one's going to explicitly stop them, but also no one has their back. And I think that reliance on very nebulous communication is why that scene happens at the end there, where we know the kid is set to be freed based on Oryou's musings. But because it takes a while for that to percolate around the entire network, that hasn't reached them by the time the cops come a-calling. If it had, they could have just left the kid there and let the cops find him rather than making it a big shootout over it. If there was a more direct line of communication, they could have just heard on the phone that same day. They're like, "Hey, we're wrapping this up. Let's make plans to get him back there, or take the first out you get." And they would have been like, "Oh, well, look, the cops are coming. I think we'll just see ourselves out the back and let them find this." So I think we see both the strengths and weaknesses of that style of kind of mob boss leadership.
I think
it also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, continue.
It also is because of that. It also makes it very easy for someone to co-opt her will. as we see Shmion doing in some of the other chapters where they claim to speak on behalf of her, and that's taken as face value, right? Because it's always Oryou whispers to them, they speak aloud, which I guess is her trying to like set her granddaughters up for success as the next leaders, right? Being like, get used to taking your orders from them and not me. But it also means that when, say, Shion goes and kills Oryou and steps in Mion's place, no one's going to question her when she starts giving directives that supposedly come from her grandmother.
I do think it's fun contrasting this to some of your earlier thoughts about the Sonozakis, where it seemed like they might be a more all-controlling entity. Like, they run everything that's going on. People are only able to do and say what the Sonozakis are telling them, and they're controlling this town in an iron grip of fear and things. And
exactly.
Seems that's not the case, really.
Well, they still do have that level of... It's more like a level of soft power, right? They're still extorting the Hinamizawa citizens with their, newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Their newsletter where the price keeps going up. There still is that level of fear element to them, but it makes it seem a lot less like a completely united organization with one leader and more like an organization that does broker some dissent.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not really the Sonozakis, it's the three families, which is the Sonozakis plus 5.
And dwindling.
And dwindling.
Rapidly dwindling.
Exactly. But like all other organizations, it's made up of people who have their own objectives and needs and wants and can sometimes be at odds with one another. Imagine that.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the kidnappings. So,
yes,
you think that it's because of Oryou's orders that this kidnapping happened?
It's hard to say. There is a world where she didn't explicitly order that kid to be kidnapped, but instead ordered that something be done about, like a more nebulous thing, like oh, if only we had some way of controlling, or if only we had some way to get in this minister's ear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Which then was which was then filtered and interpreted to mean what? Well, we can kidnap his son or grandson. That's how we'll get his ear. There's also the there's no, I was about to say there's a world where the kidnappers are just completely unrelated to the Sonozakis, but no, they call the Sonozakis mob doc when they need a mob doc. No, they're related to the family. It's
to be fair, you decided that he was the Sonozaki family's mob doc because he was called here, right?
No, I decided he was the mob doc because he's the one who personally sees to Oryou.
Okay.
So
let's make sure we're not being circular here.
Yeah, exactly. I decided he's the mob doc because he's the one personally seeing to Oryou and therefore is implicitly trusted by that organization. You don't have just a random primary care physician taking care of your... right? Like, Tony Soprano doesn't just go to anyone for... No, he does just go to anyone.
I was going to say,
that's actually the point of it, is he does... Yeah, no, never mind. I take it back. I take it back. Irie is completely blameless.
Totally upstanding guy with no skeletons in his closet of any kind.
Exactly.
Definitely. So, how do you think they pulled it off, then, this kidnapping and the events that we saw?
I don't know. We do know that the Sonozaki family does have bridges to other more national groups of Yakuza through Mion's father. We know that he is so it's not impossible that maybe that they use their connection to a larger national apparatus to maybe help get resources or put people in the right place. Even if it's still the Sonozaki people on the ground doing it, it's possible that they had access to resources that would give them the information to know where and when, right?
Yeah.
Even if people from that group aren't putting their own folks on the line, or their own folks out there on the front, it could be like they helped with the information to coordinate that. I don't actually have a problem believing that kidnapping happened the way it was shown.
I do find it interesting, though, that at the same time, we learn that the Sonozakis are not as all-powerful and all-controlling and all-knowing as we thought they might have been this chapter. And yet we also see that the kidnappers are able to access private contents inside the private home of members of the federal government.
Yeah,
which it feels like we're being pulled in two directions, right? On the one hand, they're far more powerful than we ever thought. They can get into a locked drawer in the home office of the Minister of Construction without anyone seeing what's up. On the other hand, they're so much less powerful than we expected that, it's just some folks sitting around and chatting, and sometimes folks choose to do what Oryou vaguely suggests at.
Mm-hmm. And
weird that it's both, huh?
It's weird that it's both. And the reason, and I've thought about this, and the reason, because it seems to imply that there's two different organizations there, right? One that's maybe more competent and one that's less. But it still feels like it has to be the Sonozakis, because who else would be motivated to stop the Hinamizawa Dam project?
Yeah, it's not
it's like how many other groups are going to have that level of motivation to defend a small podunk town?
To be fair, I'd say motivation, everybody in Hinamizawa, aside from those who are going to accept the buyouts, and even some of those based on social pressure, but means, it would seem that everybody else in Hinamizawa has even less means than the Sonozakis. So if anyone can do it, it's got to be the Sonozakis somehow, but fucking how?
Yeah, exactly. and that's the thing that I keep coming back to. It's like, whether it's the Sonozakis themselves or themselves under the aegis of the Guardians, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like maybe they have a smaller in-group within the family that does these kinds of things and can. But it's so weird seeing like the three families version of the Sonozakis, and then the version of them that can marshal resources to make these things happen.
Yeah, it's like learning that the CIA is also just some granny's coffee clutch.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like it feels like those couldn't be the same thing, and yet it seems like they are. So
right,
how?
And I don't want to come across as like I am considering that there's another difference here, but like maybe there's an in-group within the Sonozakis that are getting this, that do have the motivation and trust to get this stuff done. Like maybe it's not Oryou in the front of it, but maybe like the Guardians, whatever the Guardians are themselves an insular group of the Sonozakis that are making this happen and have that kind of tight-lipped motivation. But it's the two guys we see taking care of the kid are just some schmoes.
Yeah,
they're just some schmoes. It's so it's
like I sure don't believe those two could get into a building owned by a member of the federal government without being detected, access secured areas, and not be caught, despite knowing that place is also under the surveillance of the federal police already.
Right, exactly. And it's like,
and yet they have the kid. He's right there, and they have him.
Yeah, and it's. There's a couple of ways that this could resolve. One, sheer dumb luck.
Which would rock. It would fit the theme that maybe it's coincidence that you're bringing up.
Maybe bumbling idiots that happened to get it right, and just things went well. Second option, again, using resources from this nebulous national Yakuza organization. Feels like a little bit of a cop-out to rely on that, but it's not without grounds. Third, and this one's spicy, is that the minister was conspiring with them to make it look like a kidnapping happened.
That is spicy.
The reason they got it is because the minister allowed it to. Which and if he had that inclination, explain why he was already under surveillance, right?
Yeah, if he was already corrupt and in the Yakuza's pocket and so on, that'd be a good reason for him to be under surveillance. It'd be a good reason for him to take this weird roundabout way to capitulate instead of just capitulating.
Right. And we know that the Sonozakis have family members in the national government.
National? I don't think we know national.
I thought we did. I thought they had people in the Diet.
Do they?
I
thought it was the prefectural assembly, but I may be just misremembering. So let's assume they do.
Maybe let's assume they do. I'll pay attention for that. But there is a spicy version of this where it works because the minister wanted it to, and I don't even have the time to think about that right now because that would be fucking wild. Imagine doing that to your own grandson. Imagine a world then where, but that also wouldn't make sense if that was the case with Oryou's take on it. Because Oryou's like, hasn't he been here long enough? He must be really sad without his grandson. Because if the spicy version is true, that means Oryou had no idea that was happening, which means the real power is with someone else. Or with a different group, and I'm not ready to spin that out. It's a whole lot of spinning out things into unknown organizations that haven't been established yet that I'm just not ready to commit to.
I do find it funny, though, that the structure of the Sonozakis leaves that possibility open.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything that happens, we don't know for sure that it's because Oryou said so. We know Oryou said a bunch of things and then stuff happened, and then Oryou said a bunch of other things and other stuff happened, but there's always the plausible deniability because that's the point.
Exactly. That's the point of it, which is the reason why I can spend so much time being like, but what if? Anyway, spicy version, the minister is actually in on it. There you go. There's your spicy swing for today. I don't know that I'm going to call it a big swing, but it'll be a spicy one.
So, I've just remembered, I forgot to ask some things about Rika.
No. Are we going back to Rika?
Yeah, I want to squeeze in another thing, maybe two things before we're done talking about characters. So, one thing I think is really interesting to think about, if she's time looping, where's her loop point?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? If you had asked me before chapter 4, I would have said at the beginning of chapter 4 during that summer. But it seems clearly to be before that point.
Yeah.
Since we see it happening, or at least when Akasaka's around.
And we hear about weird behavior in the mother's diaries as well.
Right, exactly. It's just that she goes back to birth every time? That would be awful. Having to, with the mind of someone older, live through the years where your body can't control its own bowels.
Be like, I'm fucking 35, but I can't speak yet or even control when I shit myself.
Do we know what years those diaries were written in or when they cover?
We don't. We only know broad strokes that it talks about Rika growing up and what it was like raising a child like that. So we know it's at some relatively early point in her life, but we certainly don't know when, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, if this was Return by Death rules, I'd say the earliest point, in which case it gives her the chance to do what she needs to do. I don't know. It's fucking. I would say either the year we see Akasaka. Like, I don't want to say any earlier than that without reason to, but maybe some of that is also getting conflated with the fact that Rika is could also, independently of having weird future knowledge stuff happen to her, is also just a child that is difficult for some parents to deal with. Does that make sense? Like, independently of that, she is also just someone who maybe didn't show happiness easily or needed to get her cues from other people in order to understand what was going on.
Do you mean to suggest that the contents of the diaries are not about
Yeah, like maybe the contents of the diaries are just about genuinely how it was difficult raising her because Rika wasn't like other children.
Although, to be clear, this is where a bunch of the justification for your time loop
That
theory
is
comes
true.
from. Things like her knowing events that are going to come on the radio before they
Yeah.
happen. Things
So-
like exhibiting skills that her mother had not taught her.
I
So-
guess the ambiguity is, does that happen before the events of chapter, like in the years before chapter 4, or in the time between then and when her mother dies? I guess that wouldn't make sense. I guess then, like, if it's not the beginning of the most relevant point, then probably she just starts over from the beginning every time, and that's got to be awful. Oh, but maybe it's also
the
why
world's oldest baby.
Yeah. Oh no. She Benjamin buttoned her. Yeah, that sucks for her. If it's not yeah. But maybe it's also like not perfect, and that's why when she's growing up, it kind of starts slowly impressing itself upon her. So every so often, right?
Yeah,
Maybe that's a little bit closer to it.
that could be.
Where it's like she's young, and then like slowly she's getting older. But then again, by the time Akasaka comes around, she's already pulling off some pretty elaborate stuff and is very articulate about what's going to happen to her in the future. So
Yep.
I don't know, and I'm not certain it's important.
Here's something interesting then.
Yeah.
But I think hinges on whether it is important. So if she is already time looping before the events of all this stuff.
Yep.
Why does everything turn out really similar up until the point the story starts? We get a lot of differences as soon as we hit that point.
It's because maybe she's having a hard time affecting change. Maybe she's having a hard time affecting, or maybe that's a really good point, isn't it? Because that's why I would have assumed that that's where it
Yeah.
started up until that point, and learning that that it doesn't start until that point. Maybe it's because she doesn't necessarily care about the people who died in the interim. There's always that. I mean, like, we know that or it looks like she maybe called Ooishi and tried to get in, but maybe it takes her a couple of times to realize that she has more agency in this than she realizes. And we also learn she is really happy, just like all she wants to do is spend time with her friends. And she gets to do that. So while she certainly doesn't want the last thing to happen that seems to break their friend group apart, maybe she's literally phoned it in, like, okay, hey, Ooishi, maybe you should keep your eye on this person this year. Anyway, I'm back to hanging out with my friends now.
That would be an interesting time loop story, wouldn't it? About someone time looping and also kind of phoning it in, not thinking that it's gonna work.
Right, because maybe she's a little defeatist about it. Here's the thing: is that just because you're time looping, it doesn't mean that you would necessarily make the leap to I have agency and I am the person to stop this.
Yeah.
It seems really ingrained to us in like time loop fiction that, oh, they're time looping, they're the person with agency, they can stop things. It's not immediately clear to me that a child who found themselves reliving those years of their life would immediately jump to, I need to do something about this so this stops happening. She definitely seems motivated to try to stop things about her own death, right? But it's not immediately, maybe that's all that she, like, oh, this is giving me a chance to undo my own death. Maybe all this other stuff is just incidental. But it's not immediately clear to me that she would take that initiative from the get-go. But, man, I don't know. Again, I think maybe she's just motivated by stopping her own death. Well, no, because she does go out to great lengths to stop Akasaka's death. It's pretty elaborate. Akasaka did nothing wrong, I guess. I guess. So many little I feel like I know so much and yet so little. I feel like I've engaged with this story to a lot more than I would have any other story, and yet I feel like I've come out with more questions from doing so.
That means you're reading it right. Side note, I would love to read a time loop story in a deterministic universe where, in fact, time looping does not mean you can change events. The events are just the events.
So there's no such thing as free will then, or like do they have this knowledge but are unable to do anything with it because the events are set in stone? Or
yeah, I guess this would require it to be something like a setting where epiphenomenalism is true about consciousness, where maybe they're aware that they're time looping and they can have internal thoughts and so on that are different, but
their
for
body
whatever
still goes
reason,
through the
no
motions?
matter what happens, it still leads them to do the same things. And the same things happen. And
that sounds really interesting.
it would be hard to write.
Yeah, it would be. Especially something yeah.
Yeah, I guess you could write it kind of like a Rashomon, but where all of the ones are from the same person's point of view, but as they get progressively more jaded and detached about it. So they're in the same situation, seeing the same things, but internally experiencing them completely differently.
But somehow
maybe even having different motives and ideas and so on, but still ultimately
resulting
doing
in
the
same
exact
actions.
same thing at the exact same time. I think you could do it.
That'd
I wouldn't be
so
surprised
funny.
if someone did do it, but I'm not aware of a story like this yet. If you know of one, tell me of it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
All right. So,
Yep.
all right, let's do
Grab
some
bag.
grab bag questions. Volition asks, are there any characters you would feel safe to confide in if you lived in Hinamizawa? Choose carefully. Your life may depend on it.
I don't know. I feel like Chie Sensei hasn't done anything wrong. Other than really I feel like she hasn't done anything wrong, but she's also very beholden to the structures that make her a teacher.
Yeah.
So she is compelled to act, but the levers that are open to her and the things that she must do as someone who is compelled to act are limited by the structure of the government in the child welfare services or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's the whole wait and see thing that comes out of it. I think there's a difference between, is there someone I would confide in, and is there someone I think could change things, could work to change things. Ooishi clearly has at least the desire at the end of things to change things, but he, despite his power as a cop, doesn't seem to actually be able to do much of it leading up to it. We see him chasing down a lot of false leads and like visiting people beforehand, but nothing seems to change. So I don't know. Who would I confide in?
I have an instant answer.
Who?
But we'll get yours first.
No,
so
go for it. I'm
you.
still thinking.
If I give mine, then it's gonna shade your thinking.
Oh well. Okay. Jesus. I'd confide in Rika.
Okay. That's fair.
She's the only one who seems to have enough context to know what's going on, and I feel like any more information we can funnel her way is helpful.
Yeah. And we know she's tight-lipped about things. She's not going around spilling information willy-nilly to whoever.
Exactly. And she seems to be the only one with the agency to make things different in different go-rounds. So, you know what? I'd go to Rika.
My answer is definitely Mion. You could tell Mion absolutely anything anything that has happened, any crime you have committed or whatever, and she probably will punch you in the face, but she will not rat you out.
No, Mion is ride or die.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate that about her. I do very much appreciate that about her.
She would definitely help you bury a body if you needed it.
She would. Yeah, you know what? She would, wouldn't she? In fact, she'd be like, "Hey, don't worry about it. I've got a spot. Want to put it in the body spot?
I am going to rag on you for stupidly doing a murder that you now need to cover up, but don't worry.
Don't worry.
I got this.
I got your back."
Okay, another grab bag.
Yep.
Lady Burncastle asks, do you have any different thoughts on the time-killing chapter name and the chapter description having gone through the story?
Ooh, and there was a lot of follow-up discussion about this in the Discord I saw, about people getting into the finer details, where it's not really like time killing as in like, murdering time killing in the sense of like wasting time. Like, which is really funny to us after this discussion of what is Rika up to during those years if she's just wasting time with her friends. Yeah, I think it's really, really kind of a humorous little highlight of that like, what does Rika really want out of all this? She just wants to spend time she wants to waste time with her friends playing games. That's all she wants. All this murder stuff is being circumstances conspire to ask more of her, but she's just a child. What, like, come on now. Let her play games with her friends. Why all these murders got to happen, huh? That's my thought on that. It's not really deep, but
that's fine. Doesn't have to be. We're in the grab bag where anything goes.
Anything goes.
Yeah. I have one more.
Okay.
Lulu asks, what answers do you want from the answer arcs?
That's a great question. I would... First and foremost, I would love to get some more insight into, like, specifically... Well, no. Let me back this up. What answers would I like out of the answer arcs? I don't think the game is going to come out and give us this is what happens to these people when, because, like, that's not the same style, right? But I do think we will... I would like to have something that more solidly helps us lock in the motivations of the characters. I think with a better knowledge of like what the characters want and why, that can only help us determining what happens in each of the loops and why stuff happens at this time and so on, like that. Because events can change between things, I don't like there's no, I feel like there's no one set of answers we could get that would explain everything, but knowing people's motivations a little bit more deeply, I think would. I do think we are going to be told explicitly what the Great Hinamizawa Disaster was. That is one of the things I do think we will get an explicit answer on.
Yeah, volcanic gas.
And whether or not it is just, even if it is just a reminder that, like a reiteration that, yes, it was actually volcanic gas. I know it seems unreasonable based on how the gas would flow, but we've done it over. It literally was just volcanic gas. Even if that is the answer, we will get a definitive reiteration of it. I think we're going to get I want an explanation for why the Sonozaki bunker is the way it is, if that matches up with my thoughts. I want an explanation for why Rena. We get a little bit of an explanation of why Rena is the way Rena is, but it'd be nice to hear someone explicitly say that that's what her deal is still going on, that maybe she's still not well come the modern day. What other like direct answers would we need here? Be nice to get a direct answer on on how exactly the Sonozaki organization... No, we already have an answer on how it's structured. What am I saying? I mean, it would be nice to have definitive answers for who did which of the murders and how. I don't know that we will. Again, not really Ryukishi's style, but I feel like that would be something really leading us up to it, at least, to the point where we can connect the dots ourselves would be nice.
Mm.
And then just some kind of confirmation that, like, yeah, no, you were right. Yeah, this is the exact thing. Since those seem to be relatively the same throughout each of the variants. What the hell happened to Satoshi? It would be nice to have a definitive answer on that.
Yeah, that would be, wouldn't it?
A very definitive answer on that, and not just kind of him specifically, especially given that my theory about Keiichi's identity is tied up in who Satoshi is. So, a definitive answer there would be very helpful. And I think the most important answer that we're all waiting for is, what kind of femboy stuff does Keiichi's dad draw? Vital.
Absolutely.
All of this exploration of gender has to come out to something, right? It can't just be there for no reason.
I mean, to be fair, it does come out to something. It comes out to...
Yeah, okay. Anyway. I don't know that, like, weirdly enough, I haven't really been thinking of it in terms of, like, what answers... I guess based around the problems that I framed it around, which are, like, what's the deal with the Watanagashi murders? That seems to be the biggest what if. I guess that would be the biggest question to have an answer then, right?
Hmm.
I'm not good at answering questions about what answers I want. I'm good at looking at more things more and more deeply and being vague about it, but I'm very bad at being like, what could you tell me by fiat that would answer my questions? Because that doesn't feel right. If I didn't have to work for it, did I really get there? Oh, and that's it for chapter 4.
How does it feel?
I feel emotionally drained, but amped and ready to go.
I see. Drained and amped at the same time.
Yes, don't worry about it. It makes sense. I feel like I do feel like I've positioned myself for success here, and I feel like I do feel that this rewatch will be fruitful. It's going to take time, and it's not going to all happen at once because we've got other things going on. So please, don't ask when. But it will be on the channel at some point in the future. We're not just going to let this one hang. But I feel like when we do come back, the rest of the answer arcs will be the better for me having spent that time doing it. The thing you'll want to watch out for now is if you're on the Discord at some point in the future, I will make a little call being like, hey, we're going to be doing a question arcs full up discussion at some point in the near future and gathering questions for that. I might make a post about it on the YouTube too. It doesn't matter, but don't ask me about it till you see me talking about it. Please, it's going to take me as long as it takes me, and it's going to be better for the time that I took. Okay? We can all agree there? Awesome. And then we'll do one big question arcs discussion video again, and then we'll get to the answer arcs.
Yeah.
And the answer arcs, because it's kind of all downhill from there, we'll still do our discussion videos, but I also expect it's going to be, it's going to be all downhill from there. It'll be a little bit easier going.
Yeah.
Not to say there won't be questions and stuff, but like with more answers and stuff coming, it should be stuff falling into place more. Yeah, that's what I got for you. I'm glad you guys watched this. It means a lot to us. That it genuinely does. That as we've been slowly pivoting ourselves to the longer, more discussion-based series here, rather than the shorter gameplay-focused stuff, that y'all have stuck around for it. I like this niche, and I
Me
like
too.
that we can do this stuff and engage with y'all on it. Bye. I think that's it. I think we just say bye now. Goodbye.
See y'all
everyone.
when something else cries.
Smash that like, comment and subscribe.
Hey, it's the Umineko spoilery
Spoiler
section.
zone.
Oh my god. If you're in here, that means you're accepting full game spoilers for Umineko.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, man. This is your chance to hit next video on the playlist if you're just listening through. You might want to do that, or you can stick around. There's your fair warning. What do we got?
So we have one question, actually 2 questions, but it's basically the same question.
Well, that was a lot of to-do about 1 or 2 questions. Hit me.
Mushroom asks, how does reading episode 4 of Umineko inform how you read chapter 4 of Higurashi? And Lady Burncastle asks, what effect, if any, is there from coming into this with Umineko knowledge, with the parallels one can make between Rika as she is in chapter 4 and Maria Ushiromiya in episodes 1 and 2? So both of these questions asking about, hey, what about... Wait, no, those are fairly different, actually.
Those are different.
Those are
what
different.
Are you
Sorry.
saying?
Those are totally different. Okay. Let's talk about the first one first. I actually, I'm going to admit, missed the end of Lady Burncastle's question
Wow.
when I was putting it in here, and I thought it was asking about Angie in chapter 4.
Oh,
rather than
yeah,
asking about Maria in episodes 1 or 2. So that's my bad. Let's start with
I
mushrooms.
was going crazy. I'm like,
No. You were paying attention. I was careless. So let's start with mushrooms. How does reading episode 4 inform how you read episode 4?
Great. So episode 4 in Umineko, the big takeaway, structurally, is that this is the big moment where the game hits you over the head with you've been given all the clues now. This is what you get. You need, if you haven't started yet, you need to be reading through this. Otherwise, a lot of this is going to be unsatisfying. And it ends with a revelation that kind of fundamentally changes how you read the game. In Umineko's case, the very explicit confirmation that Kinzo is dead and has been dead this whole time. And
I've been dead the whole time.
And having that confirmation fundamentally changes how you read what's going on before. Because now you realize that what you're seeing, or what the game is kind of pushing you into, is what you are reading is not literal fact. This is not a literal recounting of events from a dispassionate observer just here to say things as they are, or as close to that as they can be. The events you are reading are filtered and interpreted by the people there who are speaking them. The events you are reading are recountings of people that have an agenda and how they spin events. And it is your job as the reader to figure out who is benefiting from telling the story this way. Chapter 4 of Higurashi doesn't make its big twist explicit. I feel the big thing being what is the deal with Rika? But even if you don't put together the time looping bit, knowing that even if you just take it as Rika is operating under the fact that she has knowledge of the future.
She knows she will die soon.
That knowledge fundamentally changes how you read Higurashi. It's not just an anthology series about events happening in a town with different outcomes. It is a single through line narrative where someone does have the knowledge between them and is trying to change something between events. And that knowledge fundamentally, I said it fundamentally changes how you read it. And it's also kind of a little during the tea party, a very explicit reminder from the author to be hey, please be engaging with this. There is a lot to find here if you spend the time to engage with this work on the level it wants. And I kind of think that it's very similar cap off in both ways. A big shock and a swift kick in the ass. So from a purely functional standpoint, I feel like it matches up nicely in that way. I think one of the big differences is that Umineko had a much more explicit ongoing outside story that reached its own climax at that point. Whereas the outside narrative of Higurashi doesn't really exist yet. It's not until like chapter 4 where we start seeing people talk about Higurashi, which is really, that's when you know shit's getting important. You know, the narrative itself is all well and good, but it's only when people start talking about the narrative that it yeah. So that's also kind of why I knew that this was the point where like we were going to stop and let me do a rewatch. Because after doing Umineko, I'm like, okay, I kind of trusted that this was the point where it was going to be. You got the meat of it. Go off, do your thing. You know, take it all. It's also why I didn't do rewatches before each of the other chapters, because like I don't want to rewatch that stuff however many times if I know I'm going to do it again at the end of chapter 4. Let's just everything's on the table now. It's up to you to put it together.
Everything's on the table now. There's nowhere to set this stuff down.
It's like Tom Stoppard's Arcadia. Everything is on the table. That's the big takeaway from that play. All right. And now the second question.
Yes, Lady Berncastle, what effect, if any, is there from coming into this with Umineko knowledge and with the parallels one can make between Rika as she is in chapter 4 and Maria Ushiromiya in episodes 1 and 2?
Oh god, that was awful. It's Ryukishi really likes writing about mothers who struggle to raise their children who are different. It hurt because like that was Maria was the first person I thought of when we started learning that stuff about Rika. I was like, oh no.
Is that also what you thought of last chapter with Sadako and those things?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Surprise, we get an embarrassment of riches this time. 2 abused children.
Wow. I think with Sadako it didn't make me think of Maria because yeah, it was a bit abusive, but there was no pretense of lovingness. And I think that's what makes the difference here is that clearly Rika's mother is struggling with how to love her child. She wants to be a good mother. She is invested in raising her child well, and she can't. And that frustration manifests in her lashing out against her child. Teppei has no fucking horse in the race of raising his own daughter.
Yeah.
Or not daughter, stepdaughter. Niece. Stepdaughter now? Whatever. Teppei doesn't give a fuck. Teppei is checked out. He has no care about the well-being of Sadako in the long run or how he's doing as a parent. And I think it's that care, that investment in how they're raising their children that really makes the Maria and Rosa's dynamic so heart-wrenching. Because Rosa is a shitty parent. Let's make no bones about it. But she's a shitty parent who desperately wants to be a good parent and can't figure out how. She is a shitty parent who is perfectly capable of realizing the horror in what she's doing, but doesn't stop because she doesn't see another way. And that sucks.
Yep.
That sucks, man. Oh. And I think that's also what's going on with Rika's mom, even to a lesser degree, and like we don't see her nearly as often. And Rika doesn't seem
largely since she's dead.
And Rika doesn't seem to put up about the fact that she's dead. But Rika's mom does seem to like she does express that she like you get the impression from her that she does want to be a good mother. She does want to raise her child well, but she can't understand what her child is doing and can't make sense of like how do I encourage her? Oh, well, she's making weather charms. So be nice about it. Okay, like yeah, I can finally understand her. I cannot understand my child. And again, that manifests in her taking that anger out on Rika. So I guess I was kind of ready for it. But it's also like a much narrower slice than the version of it you get in Umineko.
Mhm.
Because in Umineko, it's doggy. I think Umineko also spends a lot more time humanizing Rosa and why she acts the way she does. Whereas in Higurashi, it's just kind of like it's there. You get a little bit of it, but it's clearly not the focus of the narrative.
Yeah.
Rika's mother is not even a named character in this story.
Yeah. I was going to say, the really big difference is that Rosa is, in fact, a character in Umineko.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas Ms. not appearing in this game is...
Doesn't even get a sprite. Does she get a sprite in the console? Maybe she gets a sprite in the console version. I don't know. But she doesn't get a name. And I think that's telling. Well, I can't. Why must these children fit so much trauma inside of them? Is it safe for us to watch the Higurashi anime now?
I don't know.
We've got the box set of.
We do have the box set on DVD now.
With the incredibly distressing cover. But, regardless. Thank you for stopping by the Umineko spoilery section. Actually, you know what? Before you go,
Yeah.
one other thing.
Yeah.
Higurashi When They Cry is a book that exists within Higurashi When They Cry.
Yeah.
Umineko no Nakukoro ni is a narrative that exists within Umineko no Nakukoro ni.
Yeah.
I'm fucking dying over here. So, like, what's going to happen in the answer arcs? Is it people reading Higurashi When They Cry and being like, I wonder what really happened? And then, like, the one survivor who's still there, I don't know, maybe Keiichi, or maybe Rika finally lives through it and is just, like, trying to live her life now, but she can't do it because people keep asking her about this book, Higurashi When They Cry, and being like, Rika, why won't you tell us what happened in Higurashi When They Cry?
Also, let's not forget that Higurashi When They Cry is a story that exists within Umineko no Nakukoro ni.
I think that one we accept is mostly as a joke, though. I think we accept, because in the anime, it's an anime that Maria's watching, and in the book, it's a book. But I think we can accept that that's also a joke, unless it's also the case that the Hinamizawa stuff happens in that timeline, and the book they have is the Higurashi When They Cry book asking you to find the truth.
Which I hope is the case.
But
I think that would be great.
I think that would be pretty rad, yeah.
In before it turns out that the Umineko fragments exist.
Yep.
Here somehow.
Here's the other thing, is that Umineko has absolutely set me up for an ending that is not going to be happy. I don't... Maybe it's different with Higurashi, but I don't know that the ending we get is going to be sickly sweet. You know what I mean? I feel like that won't happen. Umineko's ending is so bitter. It's bittersweet, but the ratio of bitter to sweet is really lopsided.
Yeah, it's the 99% cocoa dark chocolate, where like there's a sweet, but it's like someone dropped a sugar cube in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
That's the amount of sweet.
There's amount of sweet in. It's the perfect ratio of just enough sweet to make the bitter hit even harder. Don't get me wrong, I fucking love Umineko's ending. I literally cried when we were reading. Do you remember when we were live streaming? Like, there's a video of me, a live stream of me on this website crying when the fucking not battler shows up in the future, and we're like, oh, that's awful. But I don't know how this story ends. I don't know what conclusion we come to. Is it finally Rika gets a timeline where everyone's alive and happy? Probably not.
If she did, do you think things would be okay?
That's the thing, is that, like, everyone being alive and well doesn't change the underlying things that motivated them to do those actions in the other timelines, right? I don't know that there's a good ending to this, other than if you wanted, like, the best possible outcome, it like the weird Mary Sue steps in and solves everything outcome. It'd be some kind of outcome where everyone comes forward with their own conflicting interests and finds and is open about them and finds some position that satisfies them all without having to kill anyone. And that doesn't seem fundamentally possible given this setting. I think the best ending we get is one where Rika finally doesn't die and is able to at least understand what happened and move forward with that. Maybe one where she gets to be with her friends, but maybe not. I think maybe that's the best future we have to hope for.
Fair enough.
Anyway, that's my own little spicy add-on for you in the Umineko spoiler section.